Please take your seats. We're about to begin. Please settle down, everyone. We're about to start. And welcome back, everybody. Please take your seats. We're about to start. Thank you so much. The room is absolutely buzzing with excitement. It's such a joy to watch. So I hope you had a good break. We are very excited to kick off the afternoon with our IFPRI Alumni Roundtable, featuring colleagues who continue to shape food policy around the world. Now, we will have another Q&A session just before the next break, and so we would love to hear from you. Please continue submitting your questions on ifpri.org, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, or by using the hashtag AskIFPRI on X. And to lead this session, I'm pleased to welcome someone who is very well known to many of us in the room, probably needs no introduction, Dr. Maximo Torero, Chief Economist at FAO, who will begin with the IFPRI alumni presentation. Maximo.
Okay, hello, thank you so much. It's very nice to be here, and congratulations to IFPRI for 50 years. So I have a very challenging job today. So let me present the alumni. Lawrence Harat, Executive Director of GAIN, which is connected virtually. Hi, Lawrence. Eleni Gabriel Manhin, Executive in Residence, Georgetown University and McDo School Business. Welcome, Eleni. Jikun Wan, Dean of School of Advanced Agricultural Sciences in Peking University and Founding Director of China Center of Agricultural Policy. Titsi Makombe, Director of External Relations from Academia. Welcome, Titsi. And Susan Tonazzi, Senior Vice President of Global Burners. So I think if you can all join me here so that we can start the discussion. I see you now, Lawrence. Nice to see you.
See you, Maximo.
Please come in and we can start the discussion. Optimize today with the roundtable of all of you. And let me first start by saying that as a member of IFPRI has been a great experience here when I was here for 15 years, I think. So it's a place that you learn a lot. I was very lucky when I came to IFPRI to have Eleni, which was in my hiring committee, so she hired me. I had Lawrence, which was director of the nutrition division in those days. Joachim von Braun was the director general. Peter Hazel, which was also here. And Paul Dorosh, and many of you. Also, my leader, CGE creator, which is also here. So it was an amazing experience because my first days at IFPRI, I went to a room and I hear such a deep discussion between the directors of IFPRI in those days, which was, wow, it was fun to come from being in UCLA and being in Peru, because I had to go back after my Fulbright scholarship. Was incredible to start again back into international organizations when I came here. So that dynamism and that very high level of scientific rigor when we were working here was something that I really appreciate, and I learned a lot from it. And was something that allowed me, as I moved up in IFPRI and finally became the director of the markets division, was something that was really an amazing experience. And it's something that I hope you keep going, and I see because of your publications and how you are ranked, that things are moving technically, but I hope things keep moving and you show resilience and strength to the shocks that we are facing. You have to be resilient. That is the only way to keep going and to find ways, find alternative ways to keep moving ahead. I think it's always possible. You know, challenges times happen all the time. It's not new. It's not the first time that shocks happen. Although, as Joe was saying today, COVID-19, the problems now with funding and so on and so forth, is something that has been too sequential, not too many hits at the same time. But also it's a time to take the positive side and to learn from it and to find ways in which we can try to increase our capacity to do things. Like for us, where I am now at FAO, COVID-19 was a great experience. Why? Because we were able to become digital immediately, which when I was in FAO in COVID-19, everybody had a desktop. So it was very difficult to move out to your homes and to be virtual. Luckily, we had an IT guy that decided to hide 2,000 laptops in a couple of rooms. So we could discover those laptops because the guy was fired. And we were able to digitalize all FAO over the night, and then everything changed. And then on terms of the research, we found, for example, that logistics was central, no? And we didn't have indicators of logistics. So again, from all the crises, we learn a lot and we find ways to keep innovating and so on. And I think the way to move forward in solid evidence, serious evidence, is to innovate and to keep being in the frontier. And as somebody mentioned earlier, I think somebody said that it's important not only to have impact, but I think, Joe, you said that it's important to have impact with good things and with solid evidence. If you don't have that, then you can really mess the lives and policies in countries and create a huge problem, no? But that is difficult at the same time, no? Because doing serious work takes time, takes resources, and it's very difficult to do that. So with that little introduction and no presentation, I have a great pleasure to have all these alumni here with me, which is a great opportunity for me to interact with them. And I want to work with them on some series of questions. And the first question is around their experience, so the past. And then we move to the future, where you see the future to be moving. And to look at what are your reflections from your time at IFPRI. So let me start with my dear friend, Lawrence, which I have been interacting a lot with him lately at late hours at night, working in what we call the accelerator. But Lawrence, what research were you most excited during your time at IFPRI from 1984 to 1987, 1990 to 2002, 2014 to 2016? How did your time at IFPRI shape your views about nutrition and diets? So Lawrence, simple question for you.
Thank you. Thanks, Maximo. I wish I was there. It sounds like a lot of fun. And Eleni, you made a really bad decision when you hired him. That was a big mistake, big mistake. Listen, I'm so pleased that IFPRI is getting higher and higher and bigger and more impactful as it hits its 50th anniversary. There was so much that excited me when I was at IFPRI as a research fellow and a division director. I joined as a summer intern back in 1984. I can actually remember IFPRI at 10, if you can believe that. But what excited me so much? Well, in the division that I led, we had 6 different programs of research, and I remember each one of them, and they were all, I used to joke with Peter Hazel all the time. EPTD is not nearly as good as FCND. We had all the best programs, of course, but we had microfinance, we had labor, social protection, we had safety nets, we had biofortification. And the one I'm most excited about really is the gender and intra-household program. And I guess that's because it started out very personally for me. My PhD thesis was on that. And when I got to IFPRI as a fellow, one of my first ever grants, I think it was my first grant at IFPRI, was a kind of a multi-donor grant, they're all small amounts, but from the World Bank, from Rockefeller Foundation and from Ford Foundation, from the late great Roger Slade was the first to give me some funding, and it was to do some work on intra-household resource allocation. How do resources get allocated within households? And from that series of workshops and a couple of papers that then graduated 4 or 5 years later into a big USAID program, multi-country program. You know, at that time, 1995, it was about $3 or $4 million, which is a lot of money. It's a lot of money now, but it was a lot of money back then. And then that allowed me to, we hired Agnes Kassambing, who then became the leader of that work, just did and is doing a fabulous job in so many roles at IFPRI. And then from that work, I think that work influenced the Mexican government, who were looking to revamp their social safety net called Progresa, which is, you know, a nationwide safety net program. And they had a big thing about, we want to allocate income, the transfers, to women in the households. We're not ambivalent about where it goes. We want it to go to women. And so to see that progression over a 8-10 year period from a little workshop through to a USAID research program, through to a big social safety net program that affected millions of households, that was super exciting. Back to you, Maximo.
Very much, Lawrence, for that. And the sad part is that when I came to IFPRI, you moved very fast out. I don't know why. I am worried. But then you also mentioned...
I couldn't stand the competition, Maximo.
You also mentioned Peter Hazel. And Peter Hazel was the one who gave me a window here of opportunity, because he allowed me to hire my staff through his division. So thank you very much, Peter. You allowed me to do a lot of work here hidden from my division at that time. But Eleni, also, I was shocked, but you hired me, but then you left to Ethiopia. So as the Ethiopian program leader and senior research fellow from 2004 until 2008, what were the most influential research findings from the period pertaining to agricultural markets in Africa, and how did you manage to build on this in your subsequent roles, including the CEO of Ethiopia Commodity Exchange?
Thank you, Maximo. And I must say that was one of the best decisions I made here at IFPRI. But I feel like I kind of grew up at IFPRI. And by the way, Maximo, you should know that I'm a triple alumna of IFPRI, because I came to IFPRI as a research assistant when I think Lawrence was a research analyst, and I remember looking up to him. And I also have to tease him about his bright red shoes that he used to wear back then. But every time I see, you know I was going to say that. Then I left, did my PhD and came back as a postdoc. Then I left to the World Bank, came back again, and with Peter Hazel, who was very, very instrumental in getting the Ethiopia Strategy Support Program set up, and subsequently the Ethiopia Commodity Exchange Project, which was a project under that. And from there, I came to what I call the fork in the road, which was as we were sort of wrapping up the design of the exchange, whether to stay at IFPRI and continue, doing research and policy analysis and so on, or whether to actually jump into the fray and put my money where my mouth had been, which was really to actually operationalize this idea and get into the world of business. And I haven't looked back since. So that's a little bit of the story of just trying to trace the role of IFPRI in my own career. But also, I think that, I mentioned that I came here as a research analyst, and then IFPRI funded my research for my master's to go to Mali. And that's really where the commodity exchange journey, or the story of agricultural markets broadly writ in my career started, is that that experience of going to Mali. I was working on the market information system with the Office des Produits Agricoles du Mali, which is sort of the government, marketing parastatal. And then I basically started to follow, because I was so interested in transaction cost economics and how to apply it to agricultural markets. So I kind of, and I think Ernesto was reminding me of this thing that I used to talk about, which was a month in the life of a sack of maize. And that's kind of when I started that methodology, which is really literally on a truck following following the grain as it accumulated, sort of handling costs and all the transaction costs along the way, contract negotiation and so on and so on. So that methodology and that sort of insight, which ended up becoming my master's thesis, and also some IFPRI outputs, then that kind of is what I took to the PhD program at Stanford, where I basically kind of went to Ethiopia and tried to do what I did in Mali, but then discovered something else, which was not just the cost buildup over the roads and the changing of hands, but this other thing called market institutions and social capital and the role of brokers, and sort of discovering how important the brokers were in coordinating the whole agricultural market, which was really the big insight that led to setting up the commodity exchange. So I feel like, and then that turned into an IFPRI research report. And, again, the rest is history. So I think to your question about, not just my personal trajectory, but also over this 20-year period that I've described from the 80s when I was a research assistant to the 2004 period when I was a senior research fellow. Over this period, I think we also, in Africa, but maybe even in other developing regions, saw this, shift in understanding about the role of agricultural markets. And obviously you and I were in the market, the best division at IFPRI, which was the MTID, because we were onto something that many people hadn't thought about in detail, which was really how food security is so hugely impacted by functioning clearing markets, and how market distribution is not just about building more roads, which was kind of the prevailing wisdom when I first started in this career path, which was really, we need better roads. People don't know, or even, is it market information? Well, it is market information, it is roads, but it's also the social institutions, the relationship between traders, trust, social capital. How do you know who to trade with? How do you, and I think, this is very much, I think we're still in early stages of really understanding this marketing chain and how all the institutions along the way make it matter. So I think these are.
No, thank you so much, Elenia. And when I came to IFPRI, there were two countries which I started working. One was an influence of Nurul Islam and Shahid Rashid, which I think is around here. And Nurul was so critical to me since the day I crossed the door in IFPRI that I ended working in Bangladesh and then Ethiopia. And I remember one of my first trip to Ethiopia. And I remember later on when you were there, and trying to build this commodity exchange. That was such a complex thing in a country which was facing so many challenges at that point. So it was impressive that became a reality. And I remember visiting the exchange later on. And it was impressive how you also were able to attract all these superb people from Ethiopia to work there. So congratulations on that, and happy that you are with us here. So Jikun, I'm not going to ask you still about how you are handling the trade issues between China and the US, but let's start first with the past. What were your most important takeaways from your time at IFPRI from 1994 to 1995, and from your ongoing collaboration with the Institute? And how did those experiences influence the establishment of CCAP?
Okay. When I was here in 1994, 1995, I was working for 2020 under Mas Nogura, and also under Noren Heda. He's the division head. I have three major, also very important takeaway messages from working here. First is science-based and empirical evidence policies are very, very important in food and cultural development for different countries. That's I learned from IFPRI. Second takeaway message is cultural economists and policy researchers have to working with policymakers, working with private sector, working with farmers, and we talk a lot about this. But they are making decisions, they are making policy, and they are implementing policy. Third important takeaway message is policy study need a teamwork. Sometimes need several teams to working together. So critical mass is very important. So I taken these three methods, and by August 1995, I went to Perth, Pennsylvania, entered the office, and sir, I want to stop here. I want to go back to set up mini IPRI. So I went back in 1995, I kick job, I set up a Center for Chinese Agricultural Policy in China. And then even when back China, I already look at the IPRI vision, mission. That time I was very young, more than 30 years ago. Vision, what the problem here? So I set up first problem, a technology policy program. Then I started food policy for an agricultural development program. I set up resource environment program. Last, set up a rural development program. And almost copy from IPRI. Of course, I according to China, what they need the policy start. I set up own research project in China. So I would say just 1 month ago, we have 30 years anniversary. 50 years, we are here, 30 year anniversary. I would say CCAP now is leading of agricultural policy research center in China. And we have gained an order from IPRI. Even I start working here was short. In earlier time, we work in biotech. We published the first set of policy paper on impact of biotechnology, on rice, on the cotton. And then we are in the China Biotech Policy Advice Committee because we published the paper in a scientific basis. We work in climate change also with IPRI, and now we're also working with IPRI on the digital technology, and we work in crime and so on. Anyway, in some, CCAP have been growing together with IPRI in past 30 years. And now CCAP, now we change the name called China Center for Agricultural Policy, because we are not only working in China, we are also working like IPRI in other developing countries. We hope the experience lesson of China have some implication to other countries. So therefore, I hope CCAP and IPRI in the future can continue to working together for not only China, but also for other developing countries. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Chikun. And you are in record, okay? So everything has been recorded. So Peter Hazel, you have one more impact that they copy IPRI in China. So we have another record of evidence of impact. No, but seriously speaking, Chikun, I think the issue that you raise of the importance of bringing government evidence and private sector is super important. Normally, we believe the private sector is super efficient in making decisions. That is not necessarily the case. Sometimes they are even slower than FAO in making decisions. And sometimes they are even more risk averse. So that belief that they are risk takers or efficient, and Lawrence knows also that very well, and I am sure Eleni, is not correct. And bringing all the pieces together to support the governments to make decisions. Of course, the government at the end have the choice of what evidence to take and what decision to make. Is their political decision. But the more evidence we can bring to them, the more menu of options we have so that we can help the government. So thank you so much for what you said. Titsi, total spent 15 years in IFPRI under Mr. Usman Badian, also working with you all the time, which he has been playing like Eleni, a triple role, I think, in IFPRI. He started as a very junior. He went back to the World Bank, then he came back, and so on and so forth. From 2005 to 2020, as both a research analyst and a program manager, and now you are, of course, in academia 2016. And will you speak to how IFPRI engaged with African partners and stakeholders during your time, and about how Academia 2063 became a new African organization, which has been in your whole career with all the support to CARAP and what was explained earlier this morning. So please, Titsi.
Thank you very much, Maximo. I would like to start by saying thank you to IFPRI and the organizers of this session for inviting me to participate. It truly is an honor to join. And to your question, so throughout my time at IFPRI, and especially when I was part of the Africa office that was led by Usman Badian, I had the opportunity to work very closely with many African partners and stakeholders. And really, IFPRI's engagement with these partners was organized in several ways, but I'll just highlight two. One of the ways was through IFPRI's support to Africa's continent-wide agriculture program, the one you just mentioned, Maximum CAADP. And this involved IFPRI having 5-year collaborative capacity building and research agreements with African Union institutions, regional economic communities, and Africa-based CG centers. And these agreements, they stemmed out of joint proposals that IFPRI developed with these partners, especially the African Union institutions. So overall, IFPRI was providing technical and analytical support to, yes, the continental organizations, the regional economic communities, and also countries. So it was together IFPRI with the African Union institutions, the Africa-based CG centers, IITA, IMI, and ILRI, as well as the regional economic communities, that in 2006, they established a key program called RESAX. And RESAX was set up to provide data and analytics to facilitate CAADP policy dialogue, review, and mutual learning processes. Early on, under these agreements, IFPRI and the African partners, they also together developed the first CAADP monitoring and evaluation framework. And of course, some of the support involved, a lot of the colleagues who are here, it was providing analytics to allow countries to develop evidence-based agriculture investment plans, especially at the national level. And I have to say, with time, I think this close working relationship that IFPRI had with the African partners helped to build trust. IFPRI became a technical partner of choice for these African Union institutions. They knew that they could count on IFPRI whenever they needed support. And another way that IFPRI engaged these partners, I think it was through the different forums it organized. And a notable example I'll mention is the RESAX annual conference. This was a conference organized by IFPRI together with the African Union Commission. And very quickly, it became one of the major forums that brought together CAADP stakeholders to review progress in implementing CAADP. So these were stakeholders at the continental, regional, as well as country level, civil society, farmers organizations, development partners. They all looked forward to the RESAX conference. They looked forward for it. They knew it was a platform where they can engage in what's happening around CAADP. And then very quickly coming to the founding of Academia 2063. So I really think it has its roots in how IFPRI was working very closely with these African institutions in support of CAADP. So under one of I think it was the second collaborative research agreement that IFPRI had with these institutions, there was a goal that was expressed in one of the joint proposals to say by 2014, one of the key programs, RESAX, would transition to an Africa-based host institution. But when we got to 2014, the African Union Commission was still quite busy with getting ready to implement the second decade of CAADP. So a new goal was set up by IFPRI in consultation with the African Union Commission and with the support of USAID. USAID was one of the biggest funders of these programs, to say by 2020, now there were 3 programs, RESAX, AgroDep, and the Malabo Montpellier panel, that these 3 programs would transition from IFPRI to Academia 2063. And this goal was realized in July 2020 with the establishment of Academia 2063. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tsitsi. And I remember being in Sali, in a beach in Senegal, where everybody was in the beach and I was in a basement working with Usman and Baba Diom doing the pillar 2 of the CAADP framework the whole week with no internet. And I have to steal internet from somewhere else. And that's the work that Tsitsi was managing and torturing me and others to be able to push this. But honestly, the support that IFPRI had in the CAADP framework with RESAX and analytics, then later on AgroDep, which was super powerful also to trying to help with all the modeling tools, is something that was historical. And not necessarily being sold as that. And then, of course, the centralization to creating a new agency led by Usman, Academia 2063, I think is extremely important because shows how IFPRI can build a spin-off like in China, which can become extremely successful and don't lose the connection with the host or the mother plane in headquarters in Washington. So That has been, I think, a great success for IFPRI. Susan, you work as a communication specialist of IFPRI from 2010 to 2012. We heard this morning how important is communications. So from where you joined in Burns, a global team of communications experts that helps to elevate the work done by research organizations and foundations. Given your background, we will appreciate your insights on the importance of communication in conveying policy research findings to diverse audiences. What approaches did you find most effective while at IFPRI since you have been with the Burners?
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Apologies for my voice. I'm losing it just in time for this presentation. So first, a quick word about Burness. We've worked, our global practice basically got its start working with the CG centers. So ILRI, CIAT, CIMMYT, CIP, ICRAF, all the rest, you name it, we've worked with them directly or indirectly. So while I was only with IFPRI for 2 brief years, 2 brief impactful years, I must say, we've continued the work extensively over many, many years. So I haven't felt as if I've left, really. Now to dive into the question, and I'm not going to get too nostalgic in my reply, our founder, Andy Burness, he teaches a course at Harvard and elsewhere where he talks about his own research to impact model, which is actually quite different than the model you all were talking about before of getting impact. It starts, basically, the model spells out the steps between research and policy change. And the 3 steps in between are translation, media, and advocacy. And I'm just going to go over those quickly. It starts with the research. Of course, that's where most of you here are. You're producing data and insights that are valuable because they reflect the reality on the ground. And they point to the best solutions to current challenges. That's, the definition from a layperson. Next comes translation. And this is where researchers and communicators have to start to work together to make findings digestible to wider audiences. And that means stripping away jargon. It means using social math. It means emphasizing interesting top-level findings, even if that means we can't spell out each and every nuance of a research product. Then there's the media, and this is the bridge into the real world populated by all those non-experts who don't know the first thing about foresight and policy modeling or biofortification or even food security. So journalists work under a very different set of rules than academics. And in my view, academics and journalists actually encounter some of the most rigid work environments out there. They follow the journalists follow the media cycle. They have to deal with editor guidelines, and they really need to focus on fast turnarounds. So their job is to provide information that appeals to their readers. And of course, depending on the outlet, they like buzzwords, they like trends, they like technology. They need to get the clicks. And even the more serious outlets need to prioritize getting clicks. So it has to be interesting. But media, of course, is not the end point. You need advocacy also. Once you get the story in the news, even if it's on the front page of the New York Times, you still have work to do. You have to educate, you have to get the news out, you have to work with your contacts to inspire action. So finally, you reach policy change, and this is where everything comes together. And we were talking a lot about that today. And this model sounds very neat and tidy, but it is not. And that's definitely what I learned at my time at IFPRI, is that communications and research are sometimes, in fact, probably more often than not, uncomfortable bedfellows. It's just 2 different beasts that you're dealing with. And researchers, for many reasons, really don't like to see their complex, years-long, nuanced work reduced to the simple language that reporters need to write an article about their study. So that's, a bit of a sticking point. And at IFPRI, what I'm so thankful for is I developed a deep respect for the research process. I've seen the intense amount of work and thinking and problem solving and partnership and negotiation that goes into the entire process. And especially at IFPRI, you're dealing with real people, real lives, real people on the ground. And this is a very it's a matter of life and death in some cases. And whereas other research is, mathematical signs and symbols, it's much more intense at IFPRI. It's a labor of love for these researchers. So I really can understand why it's so difficult for some researchers to allow for the translation of their work into more simpler language that then the media can use to write stories. However,
Please, you are already a minute late.
oh, I'm a minute late. Okay. One thing. We've worked with dozens of studies of reporters, and the ones that work best are those with simple, accessible language. It's like a fast pass to policy change. If you get your stories in the news, and someone mentioned earlier that policymakers don't read peer-reviewed science, they do read the news. So it's your chance to get your research out there widely.
Thank you. Thank you so much. No problem. So I always have big fights with communications because my question to them is why you are saying I am saying causality. I'm just saying association. My regression is not showing causality. But again, it's very difficult to communicate sometimes the work that we do in research. But I think one of the things that I'm always jealous and competitive, always, is my nature, is that IFPRI Communications has been very good and has improved substantially over time. And that's super useful because it helps to communicate good scientific results in a good way that people can understand. And also what is important is the linkage, because you can communicate something, but if that something is not linked to a solid paper behind, when they really try to scrutinize what you are doing, because sometimes some people will try to scrutinize seriously, then you fail because you need to have that solid background behind it. But now, so please start sending your questions because we will soon come to the questions and answers. But now we are moving to the fun part where I can ask whatever I want to each of you because it's about the future. And we want to know and to get from you, yes, Lawrence, I'm going to ask you very tough questions now. And we are going to move now into the future. And it's very important because it can give you an idea of where we need to move in terms of the future research that places like IFPRI has to do. And that's one of the, I think, the assets of this type of institutions, is that they can predict where things will be moving, because then we can take the time to do proper research to be able to move forward. So Lawrence, what are the opportunities and challenges on the research community for nutrition? And how do you see the future in nutrition? Where will we need to be focusing in the future? Where do you see the areas that will be of huge emphasis for tomorrow?
Thanks. Thanks, Maximo. There are three things I really learned about nutrition from IFPRI that I'm carrying into the present and into the future. The first one is, nutrition is a marker of development. And I remember Sherman Robinson, who was the head of the Trade and Markets Division at that time, would always I never knew if he really believed it or he was just pulling my leg, but he would say, you guys just run around pinching kids and seeing how thin they are. And so for him, nutrition outcomes were just kind of the outcome of development process. But Marie Ruel, who really taught me, and I think the rest of the nutrition community, how to link activities, program design, to outputs to nutrition outcomes, how to do that in a rigorous way. The second thing I learned a lot is about nutrition, not just as a marker of development, but as a maker of development. And this is where John Hodnott really comes into play, because his work, he said, well, we can figure that out. We can figure out what the growth trajectory is of a kid with and without a nutrition intervention. We can look at their school education outcomes. We can look at their labor market performance. We can even look at their chronic disease outcomes. And he managed to do this because he found data sets from Guatemala that started in the 60s and kept going up and 30, 40 years later. So that was kind of amazing. And the benefit cost ratios that you see from the World Bank in their latest strategy that was published in 2025, those ratios are based on John Hodnott's work. And the third thing I really learned from IFPRI is going, and I would say this to IFPRI fellows and research analysts, go to seminars outside of your division, because that's where I learned a huge amount from the markets, the trade, the environment programs. People like Usman, Maximo, Schengen, Ruth, Tom Reardon, all these folks, Mark Grant, Peter Hazel, all these folks are doing amazing research. And I was really interested in it because, you know, it's part of the food system, right? We didn't call it that at the time, but it was. But it showed me how I can get nutrition into all of those areas. I can get it into food infrastructure. I can get it into workforce. I can get it into a whole range of ag production, ag processing. I can get it into trade, get it in everywhere. And that's what nutrition people have to do in the future and today, is become adept at building nutrition into large resource flows and into large political energy, where the political energy is. So the opportunities, I think the opportunities, there are three quick ones on the demand side. I don't think we know enough about why people acquire food. We know a lot about what they consume, although not enough really. And we know how the role of prices and income, but there's a lot more to it. And the private sector have, you know, we're working at GAIN, we work a lot with the private sector, and they've got scores of researchers doing consumer insight research. It never sees the light of day, but it's all about why does this particular group purchase this particular product at this time in this place. And I think we need to be doing a lot more work there. I still think most of us in the ecosystem are too supply driven. And when I came to GAIN was too supply driven, and now we have a demand program, consumer insights program. You know, build it and they will come doesn't work in food and nutrition security. We have to understand demand behavior. Second area is the private sector. We still don't know much about, you know, when I first joined GAIN, someone at GAIN said, let's get the private sector to fund a nutrition program. I was like, and I didn't know much about the private sector, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. If it did, it would be CSR, and we don't want favors from the private sector. We want to make nutrition part of the business model. And I think we still don't know enough about how to do that. We don't have enough research. There isn't. We tried to do a systematic review on this 5 years ago, and there was nothing to review. So we need more research on that, folks. When are the overlaps between nutrition and commercial returns? When do they happen? And finally, on youth, youth is, everyone's saying we need to get youth involved in the policy process. And of course, on a sort of intrinsic basis, of course we do. Of course, their decisions that are made about the food system are going to affect them long after all of us have left the planet, right? So we have a duty to do that. But what's the instrumental value of it as well? What's the best way to do it? What's the way in which it has the most impact? And I don't think we have enough research on how to do that. Before I leave the floor, Maximo, I just want to talk a bit about the risks, because I think there are some massive risks. I think, research and evidence and data are under fire. I think we live in a world where we live in an age of artificial intelligence, but also kind of a willful ignorance. So don't let their narrative dominate your objectivity. And this kind of builds into the point of the communications point earlier on. Truth is under fire, and muzzling is an even more sort of virulent form of this tendency, and we have to really stand up for the evidence, even when it's inconvenient, even when it feels risky, because if it's risky to stand up for the evidence, it's even riskier to not stand up for it.
Thank you, Lawrence, so much. And I give you a minute more because you were a minute short last time. So if not, they're going to kill me. Everybody's looking to me here like I am discriminating. But Lawrence, you mentioned something very important, which is on the demand side. We know how much food is supplied in the world. We know where the food is and where it is produced. But if you look at the data, which is part of our role as FAO, the data on demand is close to zero. No? So we are investing a lot of money now, or the little money we have on collection data on consumption. No? And we are working with you too and with IFPRI and others. But yeah, I think understanding better the demand side is crucial. And on the private sector and nutrition, one of my concerns, and I have been raising also with my nutritionist, and I remember also from Marie Ruel here, which always lectured me about nutrition. I think it's a point in time that we need to invite the private sector to discuss things, because normally we try to avoid talking with them because they did something wrong in the past, which I understand. But I think the only way we can change their behavior is to bring it up into discussions publicly and show and bring evidence so that they can start thinking seriously what they are doing. If not, they will move in their own silo, and we will keep moving in our own silo, and we won't resolve that. So, Eleni, what are the policy priorities for agri-food markets in Africa today and into the future, and how we can most effectively inform these policies, especially in this environment where Africa is being cut down from many things, many resources that used to flow, and where there is a huge opportunity on the other hand in Africa, which is still, I hope, we'll realize. We are seeing some countries moving very fast, but others which are not. So please.
Thank you. Lawrence mentioned two words that I was hoping we were going to say in this session today. One was youth, and the other is artificial intelligence. It would be terrible if we left without raising either of those two. But before I even get a little more into that, let me just say that as I look to the future, I also, in some ways, I'm looking a little bit to the past, because I have seen now a resurgence of interest. Well, first of all, broadly writ, I saw Joe from a distance, the big AgriConnect announcement made by the World Bank, $9 billion a year now, aiming to be pumped into agriculture, seems like a resurgence of sorts. So that's an opportunity. And within that, at that session, I was struck by the presence of Google and other big tech. And that takes me really to the point I wanted to make, which is that I think the big opportunity, and something that I've been quite fascinated by and have been working on since I left the exchange and after. By the way, another impact is that we, with the company that I formed after ECX, we actually set up 7 projects on the continent. We had 18 countries that visited the Ethiopia Exchange, including from Vietnam and the Philippines. And we did, have projects in a number of countries: Nigeria, Ghana, Mozambique, Tanzania, Cameroon, somewhere else, Rwanda, and Kenya. And now I'm actually now being asked to come back to some of those countries and to really see how technology can enable us to do more with market systems. And I think there's maybe 3 big areas. The first is platforms. The exchange is one platform. It's not the only way to connect people in the market, but certainly this idea of how technology can enable better development of commerce platforms. That's one. The other is around logistics, and you did mention that, Massimo, is something I think that we really have yet to get a really good handle on. And the month in the life of the sack of maize is a very rudimentary way of looking at it. But I think that with new technologies, deep tech, particularly IoT, particularly, of course, AI, but also blockchain. So I'm actually now in conversation with the Ethiopian government on privatizing the exchange and potentially turning it into a blockchain. So that's something that is actually, really kind of revamping the whole model, and something that I think could have very interesting implications. The third application, I think, of technology to markets is in the area of traceability. Traceability/ESG, and coming to Lawrence's point about nutrition permeating everything, food safety standards, all these things that we can build into traceability in markets. So that's something that I'm actually quite excited about as well. And now coming to our youth dividend, especially in Africa, the demographic dividend, that's something that at Georgetown I'm working on quite a lot, is really how to think about innovation in a much more organic way. So, obviously we're all coming at this from a research perspective, and particularly from a public research perspective. But actually there's a whole lot of innovation happening on the edges of all of this, which is by young people experimenting with precision agriculture, with sensors. I had my agri-tech incubator in Ethiopia after the exchange, and saw just literally hundreds of incredible ideas that people were putting in a lot of, collecting data of credit scoring for farmers, smart beekeeping using sensors in beehives. I mean, so many examples I could give you, but I think the point is, how do you collect all of this? How do you create knowledge around it? How does it turn into public goods? And so there's, I think, something around how to harness innovation by young people, particularly in Africa, in a different way. But I'll stop here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Eleni. And you mentioned several things that are extremely important, but let me advertise on our side. On traceability, we have ePhyto. So you need to look at it. And we also have a platform of food safety standards because of the Codex Alimentarius to attach to it.
Absolutely.
So that's part of the normative work that we have to do. But the digital area and the traceability, the blockchains and so on, is something that will be moving at huge velocity now with artificial intelligence. But again, for me, artificial intelligence is like a wild horse that we need to jump into it and find a way to use it properly.
Yes.
And that's super, super important. Thank you. Jikun, China moves very fast, a lot of innovation. I go every year and I see completely change from the last 15, 16 years I have been going there. So what do you see as the future? You are seeing what is happening there in terms of innovation. The velocity is moving, and the current environment, which is full of uncertainties. And China is playing an important balancing role right now. So what is your advice for the future in this area, and how you see the dynamics of the world moving in the future?
Okay, yeah. As you mentioned, China is a big country, and but before I give that, what I'm doing in China is try to see in past 45 years how China moving from the least developed country. As a least developed country, China in 1978 GDP per capita is half of Africa. Right? How within 45 years transfer from least developed country to high developing country, and use only 5% of global water, 8% of global land for 18% of population with more than 95% of food. I think this, the experience and lessons, we needed to summarize how China have gone from in past for half decade, and poverty is completely eliminated in rural area. There's only one country in the world or in different country can do that. I think this is the more important thing we are doing and have lesson for other country. But given that, China also facing great challenge in 3 areas. First, food security in general, and grain security, particularly soybean supply security. We import 10 million metric tons. That's huge amount. But that's only commodity China imported this amount. Second, food security, grain security, particularly in soybean security. And second, China growth in part 41 cannot sustainable. Water not adequate, not use unsustainable. The sustainability is a huge issue. The third challenge is urban income. In the past 4 decades, rural income increased 20 times. 4 decades, and the urban income increased even more. So urban income on average is 2.3 times our net, our rural area. So that is a challenge. We see the government has calling for strategy and policy to deal with challenge. I don't have much time. I'm mentioning 4th area. First, what are technology that's number 1 in China. What technology that can help a small farmer can produce more, can solve government concern about food security, and particularly in biotech beyond GMO, biotech and digital technology. So huge investment go to biotech and digital technology. And second area is what are innovative institutions and policies that can boost the agricultural productivity, can help a farmer to produce more, can help a farmer to gain more from the market, can earn more money. Institution policy. Third is what I call IPI, innovative institution, innovative policy, innovative investment. That can lead China to more green development. And green development in China has three components. One is make water non-sustainable use. Second, make agricultural ecological system friendly. Third is make agriculture no carbon agriculture, reduce emission. These are huge policies now ongoing in China. And last one is how to create job for rural labor so that the rural labor can get out of agriculture, so agricultural land or they can give to few people and they can increase productivity and the provision of public service good for rural farmer, make more accurate provision between urban and rural. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ji-Kun. So one of the things that, for me, of what I see, what is happening now, is how China was able to diversify the sources of food in the world and how that has given them some resilience to the potential issues that they are facing today. Because now they have mechanisms to go through South America, for example, to procure the grains that they need if they need an alternative source. And that's also a good experience that came out from the Ukraine war, no? Because Northern Africa was completely dependent on Ukraine. And it's not that grains were not. Grains were there in the world, but they didn't have the trade agreements to do that. So that diversification of trade partners has helped a lot to increase resilience. And that's links to productivity and shifting towards production of high-value commodities in their own location. So I think there is a lot to learn from what has happened in China, but there is a lot of challenges on inequality, as you mentioned before. Let me now move back to Susan. You have pitched many stories to global and regional media outlets. What are your tips? How do you see communications moving forward in the future in the case of IFPRI?
Thank you for that question, and I'll be brief to make up for my time last time. One thing that's really important to emphasize, oh my God, my voice, sorry, is that crisis communications is not just for corporations anymore. I missed the session about, truth is under attack, research is under attack. That means that organizations need to prepare for pushback, even against the most robust research. So it's quite frankly naive not to be prepared if you're putting out research that has any sort of potentially controversial element. So what does that mean? Tough Q&As, gaming out potential crisis scenarios, identifying spokespeople, and just having holding statements ready, just being ready in case it happens. Ideally it doesn't, but at least you'd be prepared. So that's something that we're seeing a lot of organizations, a lot of researchers very much concerned about and tackling right now. The other thing is, then on the other side of it is we need more creativity. As we all know, the earned media landscape is changing. And when I say earned landscape, that means, placing it with the reporter through pitching, not paying for it, not putting it on social media. So we need to there are fewer and fewer reporters out there. Outlets are cutting reporters covering these topics. So we need to, come up with other ways to get the word out through earned media. There are such things as Substack newsletters. Of course, everyone talks about podcasts, but they require their own specialized way of pitching. And then their webinars, their partnerships with media outlets. It's just really a time to rethink the way we're doing media outreach. And sometimes that means something as simple as going out further in advance to reporters so they have more notice and they have more time to slot stories in. Because oftentimes, even if your story's amazing and interesting, if you don't give them enough time to do it, they can't do it because they're too busy. So it's just really much more crowded and competitive in this space. So adjustments need to be made. That is not to say that earned media is not still critical. Getting articles in news outlets around the world is still the best way to move the needle with policymakers. Right now, there is no substitute, maybe one-on-one interactions, but when it comes to communications we believe that's the gold standard. So organizations should not get rid of media operations and just do social or just do paid. There's no replacement for earned media. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you so much for saving us time so that we can move now to Titsi. Titsi, I left you at the end because we want to know a little bit more on Africa and insights. You are involved in the Post-Malabo, and you are involved in what is happening right now. We see also your colleagues are working right now, and they couldn't come because of that. So how you see the future and the future of policy research engagement in Africa? Do you really see a shift now that resources will be more scarce and countries are starting to take more seriously how they spend their money and how they prioritize to comply to this amazing plan of the CARAP framework? Because it's very strange to find something like such an organization of an structure and so on. So what is your advice on that?
Yes, thank you, Maximo. As you're mentioning, I think most of you know that earlier this year, African leaders did adopt a new 10-year CAADP strategy and the CAADP Kampala Declaration. So this is a time when a lot of these countries are gearing up to want to align their national plans, their budgets, their agri-food system investment plans to the provisions in that declaration. So really what this is going to require is a lot of demand for analytics that these countries need to align, to make sure that they develop evidence-based investment plans that are well aligned with that declaration. So there's tremendous opportunity for an organization such as IFPRI to respond to that demand, to provide those analytics. And also to engage in the different sort of, engagements that are currently happening. Even this week, the African Union Commission is organizing a meeting in Accra, bringing together different stakeholders, start discussing how to put together a new CAADP results framework. So I think it is, I know that IFPRI and even Academia 2060, they're already starting to respond to this, but I think there's certainly a greater need to respond to this demand and to support not just CAADP, but I think even more, African agendas and respond to sort of ongoing demand. And I think the other issue I also just wanted to highlight is I think Africa for the last, has now implemented 5 CAADP biennial reviews since 2017. So the biennial reviews are a platform where African countries are assessing their progress towards meeting CAADP goals. And what has come to the forefront is that a lot of these countries are facing major data challenges in terms of data gaps, poor data quality. So I see an opportunity here for organizations such as IFPRI, to step in and support to help address some of these data challenges. Because as you know, limited data does limit, I think, effectiveness of policy implementation in these countries. So there's need to invest in data governance, strengthen M&E systems and capacities and build data systems to fill data gaps. So those were, I think, some of the opportunities to support this agendas because the demand is there, but also even address data issues.
No, thank you very much, Titsi, and you raise a super important issue. Normally, we assume data is a given, and data requires investment. Data requires time to collect, and technologies have progressed a lot and will help us a lot, but it's not sufficient. We need to still keep collecting data, and next year will be very tight for us in every sense. In emergencies, we will start to see a lot of lights going off because data won't be there, and also in structural indicators like nutrition and so on. We will also see a lot of things going off because of the health service being stopped and so on and so forth. So I think we need to prevent that and we need to find a solution quickly because it will be extremely complicated. So colleagues, we now move to the questions and answers. So I don't know how this is going to handle, but if you have a question, please raise your hand. If there are virtual questions, I think you will read them. So please raise your hands if you have any question here. I see a lot of people, so I hope you will ask a lot of questions. Oh my God, you are so timid.
We'll give people a chance and first come with a virtual question. So this comes from Razan Othman, who's an independent researcher on global health. So maybe I'll send this your way, Lawrence, and maybe also invite my colleague Khalid, is he still here? He was here earlier. It's a question about Sudan. Given the country's extreme insecurity and massive displacement, which severely limit access for traditional food security data collection, how can IFPRI and partners create a resilient and validated data ecosystem, leveraging non-traditional sources such as mobile phone data, remote sensing, to deliver actionable, near real-time policy insights into rapidly shifting food needs and market access? So it's a double question, right? You're saying the lights may go out because of a lack of funding, but this person is saying, well, we've also got the rise of conflicts that are also going to impair data collection. So maybe with a focus on nutrition, Laurence, can I put that question to you?
Sure, sure. Actually, last week I was at a meeting in Bellagio on how we're going to reimagine early warning systems because the lights are going out. It was convened by the Rockefeller Foundation. Lots of interesting ideas from the big tech companies, Microsoft, Google, and so on. Interesting that not much, a big assumption that actually people use data, but I think in emergencies that assumption holds up. So in terms of nutrition, when COVID struck, when was that, 6 years ago, I asked all my 12 country directors again, I said, what's happening to consumption and what's happening to food prices? They had no clue. No one had any clue what was happening to consumption and food prices, other than it was going down probably, and food prices were going up probably. But we didn't know anything about the spatial or temporal distribution of that, or nor which groups were most affected by that. So one of the was we couldn't do anything on prices because that's really difficult, and I think there's lots of work going on that in any case. But on the consumption side, we developed with Harvard, with a couple of other organizations, Gallup Foundation. We developed a 7-minute 20 question yes/no, 20 yes/no questions that can be a survey that can be administered via mobile phone. And it doesn't have to be a smartphone. So it's 20 yes/no questions, takes 7 minutes, gives you a fantastic picture of the quality of diet and the diversity of diet. It doesn't give you quantities, but it gives you a sense of which food groups are being consumed. It's a 24-hour recall, yes/no. Been validated against the silver and gold standards in the field. It's really cheap. In fact, some CGIAR colleagues have been using it already. Reese, can't remember his last name, in Rwanda has been using it, CIAT, to track food price, to track food consumption on a week-to-week basis. And I think it's really important. Now we're working with WFP to try to build this. It's called the DQQ, Diet Quality Questionnaire, into their early warning tracking. Why? You might say, why? Diet quality is kind of a luxury, right? Higher quality diets is a luxury. Yes, diet quality is the first thing to go when there's any crisis or emergency or shock, because it is the most sensitive. It's the most sensitive thing. Diet diversity goes, then diet quality goes. So it's a fantastic leading indicator. So that kind of thing could be very useful in Sudan, and in fact, we're beginning to trial it in Somalia.
Please.
Thank you. Asma Latif with the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. So I'd like to ask a question, obviously, about advocacy. With the geopolitical challenges, with the media overcrowded, where do you see opportunities for breakthrough on advocacy in the next few years? What are strategic opportunities or ways of messaging that can get cut through? Thanks.
Susan.
I think actually, Maximo, you answered this question earlier. When peer review research is very valuable for media outreach, when it's newsworthy, when there's something interesting to say. And so if you promote peer review research and get the research out, that forms the basis of your advocacy work. Because like Maximo was saying, if you make a claim and you don't have the research to back it, reporters can't really engage with it. They can't just take your word for it. They need the research. So it's real. And there are outlets now that only will cover peer review research. They won't do white papers. They won't do, anything else. And some outlets even only write about certain peer review articles. So I would just say a research organization like this one should be taking full advantage of their peer review research to get coverage in the media and use that as a building block for their advocacy.
Anyone else wants to add something to this? No? Yes, Lawrence.
I was reading one of my favorite books is Bury the Chains, which is about the civil society campaign to end slavery, the slave trade in the US and the UK with Africa. And in reading that, it's incredible the advocacy techniques that were used there are still pretty much the same ones that we use today. Yes, the media has changed, but the techniques are the same. So I still think, an SDG2 advocacy hub, if you're asking us the question, then we're really in trouble because you guys are the experts. But I still think it's a very strategic combination of above the line stuff, which is, out there, and below the line stuff. And I think it's really important still to cultivate relationships with key journalists. So start with your audience, figure out who they listen to, try to develop relationships with who they listen to, and then only give them objective, well-rounded evidence to draw upon. Make it easy for them to do that. That's the below the line stuff. And the above the line stuff, maybe, we look to young people to be doing a lot more. We look to sports people, athletes, music artists. I know we've done that in the past, but I think we haven't done it in a very smart way in the past. So I think there are more and more people who are young people are becoming more and more sensitized to the need for meaning and purpose in their lives. And I think many of them are actually in quite influential positions in business and in civil society and in the professions, and we need to take advantage of that.
Yeah, we have a question here from Claudia Ringler.
Yeah, thank you very much. Claudia Ringler, Director, Natural Resources and Resilience. Just another easy question following on the lines of Maximo, and a question also to Maximo, among others. What would one thing you would, from your seats as IFPRI alumni and knowing IFPRI very well, one thing you think IFPRI should stop doing, and one thing IFPRI should start doing? Thank you very much.
So, Eleni.
I'll skip to what should IFPRI be doing more, because I want to stay, safe today. But I was actually doing, sorry if I would look like I was checking my email or messages. I was actually on IFPRI's social media and LinkedIn and Twitter accounts. And one of the things I was thinking is how if I wasn't an IFPRI alumna, and if I wasn't somehow interested in this world of food policy research, I probably wouldn't start following any of these pages. And so the question is, how can we do, I don't even want to call it advocacy, how can we communicate in a way that's more engaging? How can we use a lot more video content, a lot more stories, a lot more influence in the sense of, people telling stories that resonate, because that's what I've seen over the last few years that really picks up attention is people having that emotive sort of content, and I would like IFPRI to make research, dissemination a lot more engaging.
Jikun.
Okay, I will talk what IFPRI are doing. I think that one important IFPRI in my future so doing more in the policy brief. In my center, we in past 30 years we only have 10 people. We publish 1,000 paper, journal paper, and we trained 1,000 paper to about 200 policy brief. So policy maker doesn't read any paper, right? Particularly we publish paper in English, they forget. So I think translating your result to policy brief with 2,000, 2,500 words is very important for them to to learn that. And second, I think IPRI can do more for policymakers in terms of introducing what other country doing, how this can do better. Because inside the country, like my country, a lot of economists, a lot of research, they know quite well, but the policymakers don't know how this issue can did in other country, and what lessons, experience can introduce to this country. Last but not least is we hope IPRI and the CCAP in the future can working more for other different country. And China is really now moving to the or intending to move into help different country, but we neither don't know how to do that because they haven't done this. And I believe in the coming decade, more money will go into this area. If IPRI can work closely with Chinese partner, and I think we can do gain research work. Thank you.
Thank you. Susan, you want to add something?
Sure, I'll
Very
just,
briefly, please.
I'll say what I wish if we would do at a lot of other organizations, just kill the jargon, get over the jargon, try to communicate without the jargon. It will make a huge difference.
Thank you. Titsi?
Yes, to add to that, I would think IFPRI needs to invest more, I think, in building, spending time, right? For example, where you have country strategy support programs, allow the young researchers spend more time building relationships and consider, I think, counting it as a good outcome, right? Contribution to policy influence or sort of policy awareness, right? If policymakers are engaging around the issues that you've researched about, that should be seen as an important contribution and not just the ultimate outcome or not just the final publication. Maybe that's what IFPRI maybe should stop doing. But what IFPRI should do more, I think it touches to the issue around advocacy that was talked about. I think IFPRI needs to promote the use of evidence more, and I think advocacy is a good part of it. Work with new different types of partners, the non-state actors, producing, easily digestible formats of, your publications, dashboards, ways that make it easy for users to interact with the evidence and data.
Thank you, Titsi. Lawrence, please, briefly. Be critical because Joe is waiting for your criticism. So.
Yeah, don't worry. They're coming. They're coming. Engage more to do more of. Engage with the private sector more. It's the future. That's where the money is. You can find the overlaps between what they do and what we really care about, which is improving food security and nutrition. But you can't figure it out until you engage. You can't see the opportunities, and actually you can't see the risks. So engage, and engage means talking. It means understanding. They have different drivers, they have different motivations, but there are opportunities, and we're missing them. One thing to stop doing, and this is semi-serious, is stop appointing male DGs. I love the male DGs. I love the current one. But really, you're telling me there's no female DGs out there? So start appointing female DGs.
Thank you for the affirmative action. Okay, so I will answer also the question because I was asked, and I have 5 minutes, so I will take 1 minute. So I think something that I learned is what we call the T system, so horizontal and vertical. So IFPRI has been very good at vertical, so deep research, and we cannot lose that. And I partially disagree in the sense that I think still peer review publications are important. I remember fighting a lot with Chris on this when he used to review us here. But I really think that IFPRI needs to keep publishing and keep being top in applied research. Of course, the universities do more science-based research, but that is important because it backups whatever you communicate up. So that's important. But the horizontal part, that's where I think you need to think carefully, because decentralization is good, but it's also very dangerous. And we have seen a lot of models of failure of decentralization, and many institutions go up and down. So you need to think on a better way to decentralize. Not necessarily by sending people to all the parts of the world, maybe by sending satellite teams to help or deepen in countries where you are working. But you need to figure out a different way to do that because you can lose critical mass. And in the work that you do on policy, it's very important to have critical mass. So with that, I stole 1 minute of my 5 minutes closure. I have 2 minutes, so let me briefly close. So first of all, it's great to have all these great alumni with me and to be able to be here to hear from all of you. We have heard many things today which are extremely useful, I think, for the past and for the future. I think it's really important that we look at the past too and learn. I always say when I had to be here during the food crisis in 2007 to 11, when I saw what happened in COVID, I go to the 1970s and I read all the books that were published in those days of what to do, and the policies that came up were the same, basically. Every time we have a food crisis, everybody talks about food reserves, talks about the stocks, the stabilization of prices, the same story. So still there is a lot of space to innovate. The history is good, what we did in the past is good, but we need to keep innovating and not just repeating what happened in the past, because in many cases we know that it doesn't work and it failed. And I think we have learned about the importance of the innovation in intra-household allocation, the work of Agnes here, the work of Marie in terms of nutrition and methodologies on nutrition. That has been really changing the way we look at those topics and how we need to move forward. Also, what Eleni was saying on, I found lovely the fact that you track the sack of maize. I did the same in coffee in Central America, because it was the only way to really measure losses and to understand if my method of measuring losses worked, because I need to trace. People think that you measure losses, but a lot of the losses happen in the process and in production. So I think understanding how the transactions operate and how you can measure those things is essential, and it's also important to innovate on that, and innovations on technology, traceability, and finding and using the technology to that. But don't assume that technology innovations will resolve all the problems. I don't think that's the way forward. I think we need to work together with innovation and the traditional ways to be able to move forward. And that's also where the modeling and the capabilities of IFPRI on modeling needs to be revalued. Chairman Robinson was here. I think he ran away. But I think what you guys did in terms of CGEs and what is happening here in terms of modeling, the impact model of Mark Rosgrant, which was also here when I came here, are things that you need to keep innovating and keep using, because those have been really changed. It changed the way things were analyzed, and building the foresight the scenarios will be important. Data will be central, RESACs and the data and the way you are working to help African countries, but it will be a huge challenge. Yes, we try innovative tools during COVID-19, but it's not the same. If you look at the measurement error between the data collected by phones and the data collected in different mechanisms, there are problems, and we need to find solutions to those problems with the technology. But also we have the challenge right now, as I said, that there will be a scarcity of data. A lot of the data that comes from emergencies is acute food insecurity. Acute food insecurity is collected through surveys that are done by WFP and others. The budget has been cut to 50% or 60%. That data won't flow the following years. So we have this year or the beginning of next year to figure out alternative ways in which we can accelerate that process. At some point, you were discussing here the Sentinel hubs, I think, or something like that. We need to find a solution to that, but that will affect the IPC and will affect the way we look at emergencies in the world. And even if we want to do anticipatory action, which is what we are talking a lot now, you need to have models behind to do anticipatory action, because you need to predict. If you cannot predict, you won't be able to move on that. Nutrition at the center, but structural indicators of nutrition, but also indicators that are showing in advance. And we have the overweight and the underweight. No? And here you have worked a lot on those, so it's important to look at that. And also we need to address what will be the future looking with these new technologies that are evolving. It's a lot of concern, the velocity in which the technologies are moving. And what I am more concerned is how people are using it. And that's what worries me a lot, because I see even in my own business in FAO, we now have a lot of chat boxes for different topics. But if you don't train those models with intelligence component, they can produce a lot of very nice sounding things, but not necessarily the correct things. And people are writing essays with those type of tools. And now my worry is how to control the consultants and what they produce, because all of the deliverables are coming from ChatGPT. Now, even now in today, you can send the deliverables to ChatGPT and ask, is this done by ChatGPT? And it will say yes. So I think we need to figure out a way to manage those technologies, because it's good to use them, because they simplify a lot of things. But you need to know the topic to be able to use them properly. So I think it's extremely important to do that. And here also communications is important, because now communications people also think that they can communicate everything, because they just go to ChatGPT and they say, look at the resources of IFPRI and prepare me a blog on this. And I get press releases that are full of ChatGPT. and it's not the sharp and the good thing that you want behind. So let's be very careful with those things, and let's keep moving forward. So again, thank you so much. This has been great, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Maximo, and thank you to all our alumni for sharing your insights and experiences. We're going to make a small change in the agenda. It's been a very, very full day, and I think people need to stretch their legs. So we are going to take a 10-minute break. It's not a coffee break. We unfortunately already ate all the snacks. So this is just for you to stretch your legs, connect with colleagues, and settle down for the next session. Thank you. I'll see you back in 10. All right, we're almost there. Please take your seats. We are at the home stretch. We still have some very exciting presentations coming up. We are now about to shift to a key moment of today's program, the presentation of IFPRI's new strategy and a look to future research direction. So I'd like to call on Dr. David Spielman, Director of Innovation Policy and Scaling at IFPRI, who will guide us through the next set of presentations. David, over to you.
Thank you very much. So, as we've heard today several times, more than several times, we're in a new world, a new landscape. We have to rethink strategy. That is exactly what we plan to achieve in this session. We want to present and share with you IFPRI's new strategy for the next however many years, out to 2030, I believe. This is all about our future directions for evidence that supports food systems transformation. The presentations will be given by my fellow directors throughout the Institute. Then we'll have remarks from Chris Barrett, who's the chair of our Strategy and Program Committee, as well as, of course, a professor at Cornell University. This is important to us. We've spent the last year going through the ups and downs of everything that's happened in 2025 and thinking quite intensively about how to reshape IFPRI's research and outreach and partnership and capacity development agenda for a new era. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Purnima Menon. She's already been introduced to you as our Senior Director for Food and Nutrition Policy.
Thank you. Thank you, David. I will say if we were doing this in Asia, we would have unwrapped this or unveiled this in some way, but here we are in Washington, D.C., where we don't do things like that. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with IFPRI's leadership team and our Strategy and Program Committee Chair, Chris, our board, our partners, and many others across the Institute to do this thinking exercise, really, of how do we position and think about our work as we look forward. I particularly want to acknowledge the contributions to this of Channing Arndt, Senior Director for Transformation Strategies until December 2024. He has been a great partner in the thinking around this and a lot of other things that lie behind how we take this strategy forward. And also want to acknowledge Chris, who has pushed us at all times to think hard and really draw on our comparative advantages. We've had many inputs to the development of our strategy, three of which included the work that you mentioned earlier today, the 2025 Global Food Policy Report, and the many engagements around that, both in DC, as well as with our stakeholders at launch events in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. The IFPRI Foresight Book 2025 on global trends, using our foresight models, actually was also a really helpful input to thinking about what is sort of the future trends that our strategy really needs to lean into. And then finally, the impact assessment of our research was a really, really valuable input into thinking about how we make the connections between research and impact and how we talk about that both internally and externally. We've done over the last year and quite a few analyses and articulation of our comparative advantages, and we've had many engagements in this process. So our strategy sort of clarifies our vision, which is a sustainable world free of poverty, hunger, and malnutrition. Every word in that was discussed and debated, as you might imagine. But it provides an entry point for us to think not just about impacts on people, but also impacts on the environment and on the planet. The second is our mission. Again, clarity is really, really important here. There are many organizations around the world that work on issues of food and food security. There are also many research organizations around the world. But our mission is about working with partners to provide research-based policy solutions to improve food security, nutrition, and livelihoods, contribute to empowerment for all, and promote sustainable, climate-resilient food systems. So it's a little bit more than we had earlier, but it really is about the world that we think needs to be paid attention to as we look forward. One of the key sort of pillars, we have 3 pillars in our strategy, and I'll just go over each of those 3 pillars very quickly. The first is we have spent quite some time at IFPRI clarifying our approach to impactful research and engagement. So actually much earlier this year, in January 2025, we published online our approach. And our approach actually cuts across the policy cycles. If you're a political scientist in the room, and we have only a few of those here, it really is organized around Kingdon's model, for example, which says that there are problem streams and solution streams, and the best impacts happen when the solutions meet the problem streams. We think our work is important in clarifying the situation and the outlook because it keeps people's eyes on the problems that we want to solve. And we do this through many different methods: our primary data collection, our foresight models, our large data analytics, and others. We never want to let the world forget that these are important development problems. The second is making sure there are enough things in that solution stream so that when policymakers decide to do things about a problem, you have your solutions that are tested and scalable at hand. This is all of our work on impact evaluation, implementation science, scaling research, where together with partners, we are identifying best bet policy solutions. The third is the understanding that none of this goes forward if you don't have an enabling environment. And so our work on understanding and shaping with partners the enabling environments that allow for solutions to be deployed at scale is really crucial and is very much part of our approach. And the last but not least, and underpinning all of this, is the work that needs to be done on strengthening tools, methods, and capacities. So our 4-point approach is one pillar of the strategy. The second pillar is the strategy themes. What are we? We are a food policy research institute, and yet we work in systems. And so one of the things that we've done in the strategy is sort of clarify how we position our work in terms of food systems. So we actually start with the 3 themes in the middle, 2, 3, and 4, which are really about the connections between production systems, markets, and trade, and sustainable healthy diets and nutrition. And we don't take a from production to consumption only perspective there. We're also very mindful, thank you, Lawrence, also for reminding us of the importance of that earlier, of looking at diets and their links, diets and nutrition and their links back to the system. The first theme really recognizes the importance and the value of looking at agri-food systems as drivers of equitable economic growth. And then the last theme, which is theme 5, really focuses on equity as it operates on the ground. So looking at our work on gender and youth, et cetera, in our thematic area on economic and social inclusion. And then last but not least, we heard a lot about decentralization in our country programs this year. This is very much the third pillar of our strategy. Our presence around the world, our partnerships, how we operate as a research institute as we look to the future of how policy and impact happens. And so the framework that Yo showed earlier this morning actually brings all 3 of these pillars together. On the left-hand side, towards the green, you have the 4 approaches. The right-hand side with the blue, you have the 5 themes. And right in the middle, centered around the world map, you have the vision that we hope to achieve. With that, I want to express my gratitude to everyone who's done the hard work of bringing this together, and hand it over to the next presenter.
Okay, so the first theme, we're going to go through the 5 themes now. So the first theme is on inclusive growth and transformation. And, thinking back over IFPRI's history, for almost the whole of the history, IFPRI's had, a particular research issue or area that looks at the big picture, right? At the role of agriculture in economic development, in the impacts of long-term climate change, and the effects of like structural change and so on. So these broader big picture issues. But as we've heard today, the times are changing. There are big issues that are emerging on the horizon. And so this long-standing research area, which remains relevant for most of the developing countries where we are working, the focus of this research area needs to shift with those times. We need to start looking beyond the farm in a more concerted effort. We know that the off-farm components of the food system are growing faster than the on-farm components in low-income countries. We need to engage more intensively and more purposefully, we've heard this repeatedly today, with the private sector. We know that private sector investment and capital is growing much faster than the public sector, and the future of the food system is often being driven by private sector actors. And then the reality is more stark today, but it's actually been building over time, is we need to face fiscal constraints that governments are having to navigate. The level of ODA, foreign development assistance, has been growing much slower than the levels of government consumption in low-income countries. Governments need to be able to raise their own research resources. And so what does this mean for the research areas that we're looking at inside this first theme? Well, we obviously still need to look at the long-term drivers of agri-food system transformation, but we need to now focus on some of those off-farm components, like urbanization. So for a long time, IFPRI's had a research theme that focused on rural transformation. We now need to think about transformation more broadly from an economy-wide perspective. With budgets being more constrained, we need to give good evidence on what governments should prioritize with the scarce resources that they have. And so prioritizing policies, technologies, investments, very much at the crux of this new research area. As we engage with the private sector, part of it is working more closely with investment centers, government-run agencies that are advising and attracting private investors, but it's also working with the private sector itself. And that means trying to navigate through the social goals that IFPRI is always focused on with those private sector incentives and motivations, and how do we find ways for policies to achieve multiple goals at the same time when engaging the private sector. And doing a lot more work on specific value chains. So investing and doing long-term market outlooks on where commodity markets are going, but also thinking through these different value chain actors and how can we create the incomes and the profits that are needed to incentivize and benefit everybody who's engaged to ensure that everyone is participating and benefiting. And then on the fiscal constraints. And this is something new for us, but something that we have been doing a lot more in recent years is actually working with ministries of planning and finance around tax policy reforms. For a long time, we've been advising governments on how they should spend their money. Increasingly, countries are going to have to finance their own development plans, including finding opportunities to raise revenues within agriculture and food systems themselves. And so we need to engage more intensively with ministries of finance and look at revenue mobilization at the same time. And then finally, in the middle of our strategy for this, or our area for this theme, is around policy implementation. We have done, and I'm guilty of this, many times giving advice to governments on what we think that they should be doing, helping design better and more credible and more evidence-based national ag investment plans like Tsitsi was talking about with CAADP. But we need to follow up and track whether or not the policies that governments actually implement are aligned with the evidence and what the evidence suggests they should be working on. And we need to with our bigger focus on food systems, which cut across multiple sectors, we need to understand the coherence between policies that are coming from different ministries that we're needing to engage with in the future. And then tracking implementation over time so that we can tell a more credible impact story. And then for once, I was actually instructed to talk about modeling. Normally it comes naturally to me, but let me do what was asked, which is to say, we're going to talk a lot about models and methods and tools, and they're all shared by all these different themes, right? So there is no single home for any of the particular methodologies. But let me talk about IFPRI's modeling assets and what the future might look like. As was mentioned repeatedly and very kindly, IFPRI is on the forefront of many of the global foresight and modeling tools that are used, particularly for low-income countries and agri-food systems. And we've got these different tools. We're almost unique in having these very different and diverse tools. But the future for modeling at IFPRI, and I'm very excited about it, is better integration of these different systems. No one else is doing it. We need to be the first to do it. And then more importantly, we need to be the first to be driving, using AI to actually drive our tools, right? So it's not about making up data. We're still running our models, but we're running our models using natural language rather than complex codes and expensive licenses. Thanks very much.
Okay, the second theme. It probably sounds like a very traditional theme, resilient and sustainable food production. But reality is that both resilience and sustainability of food production systems remain elusive for most of our partners and for most countries, actually for all countries globally, not just our low and middle income countries that we are focusing on. And we know that there is now a lot of thrive to become more resilient and more sustainable. And we've heard the example of China just earlier today. And this shows that China is actually doing very well in one indicator that we love to track, which is changes in the rate of total factor productivity growth. And this slide shows that the countries in Africa where most of our efforts are focusing on are doing exceptionally badly with largely stagnant rates of growth in total factor productivity. And again, as we are not supposed to use jargon, so total factor productivity growth is basically growth in R&D innovation, better management systems, better institutions, everything that's not capital or labor investments. And so, why are we seeing so slow growth? And obviously, why are some countries doing very well? In terms of the role of investment in agriculture, research and development, just last week, there was a paper by also talking about alumni, three former IFPRI alumni and a few others have come out with, just a new study that is probably not surprising to those working on the topic, but surprising to the general public. Dramatic slowdown in investment in public agriculture R&D, an even more dramatic slowdown in investment in private sector agriculture R&D for those who think the private sector will take care of everything. I think I've heard a little bit of that today. And also a dramatic slowdown in joint public and private investment in agriculture R&D. Those data only go until 2021. I think we all expect that the numbers next time around will look much worse than even the slowdown we have seen already. So obviously that slowdown in investment is a key reason for the very low TFP growth, but there are many other reasons. And of course, climate change, environmental degradation, conflicts, fragility are many of the other reasons that I think we have already discussed earlier today. And so what is the sustainable and resilient food production growth theme going to do about it? Many things. So we're trying to work, and we're working already with both governments and civil society actors and many other food system actors to use exactly the approaches that Purnima has explained, focusing on clarifying the situation, which is very important now because the situation becomes very muddy with challenging investment situations, poor policy choices. So really to showing governments and other actors what should be done given this perfect storms or pluri-crisis that we're currently facing, I think is a key role of the sustainable and resilient food production theme. We also work on testing solutions and support governments with evidence-driven insights on how their enabling systems should look like, and of course, capacity sharing and tool development. And I'm just showing two of these examples in my second and last slide, specifically focusing on climate change, which is a key driver of our slowing agricultural productivity growth. The first one is under the testing solutions approach. So we're starting next year an exciting new activity
that uses a lot of jargon that I think we'll need to use Susan to help us make it understandable. But what we are trying to do is to increase equity in AI. So working with SEWA, the Self-Employed Women's Association, they have 1.2 million women farmer members who are really deprived of access to information on climate adaptation and on climate change mitigation, so both. So they're basically systematically excluded from accessing this kind of information. They already have a group or a cohort of Agevans who are trying to provide information to women farmers to improve their livelihoods and make them thrive under these extreme climate stresses that they're subjected to. And the idea is to support these existing support systems with AI-enabled tools. And we'll see how it goes, and we'll try to obviously assess the impacts. SEWA has its own climate school, so there's a lot of potential for growth and for further deployment. The other activity is, again, we've heard about that, one of the core tools that IFPRI has developed, the Women's Empowerment in Agriculture Index. So we are also developing a module to better understand how climate change affects the agency of women farmers and how women farmers can become better agents for addressing climate change impacts. Thanks so much. And I'm passing on. Oops.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ruth Hill, and I'm here to talk about the most important theme, which is fair and efficient markets and trade. So the challenge that this theme addresses is that inefficient trade in food markets worsen food insecurity and reduce sustainability, while lack of financing slows market development. And we address this challenge. We try to bring our skills to address this challenge in 4 ways. First, by conducting monitoring and foresight on food prices, trade policies, and disruptions, as well as looking for opportunities to encourage policy reform that reduce barriers to trade and the ad hoc nature of trading restrictions. And I think this is this is not a new problem. This is one of those old problems, and sometimes we're saying some of the same things, but still good to be continuing to say the same things. The second area is around working with partners to design and test policies and innovations that increase the efficiency of markets, particularly with lowering food waste and better food safety. And then thirdly, well, we know that reforms to global and domestic markets create winners and losers, perhaps more so than any other topics that we work on at IFPRI, and that having things work will require sustainable coalitions of support. So we think that political economy and policy process analysis is really important to success in this area, and that's our third area of work. And then finally, filling knowledge gaps on financial markets, delivering financing and risk management solutions to farmers and other food system actors, because we know that for the significant investments that are required in food systems, we're going to need financial markets to work. So on that, I just want to give an example of our work, some of the work we do. I thought I will start with our last theme on financing. So the challenge here is that high rates of uninsured risk really constrain investment in the system. Insurance is a vital tool for protecting farm livelihoods. And also when farmers trust their coverage, when they know they're insured, evidence shows that they're more willing to adopt new technologies and make longer term investments that improve welfare. But agricultural risks are inherently difficult to insure, and these challenges make insurance unaffordable or low quality for many farmers. This is an area where IFPRI's had substantial impact in the past, I think starting with Peter Hazel's work in this. Early evaluations of multi-peril crop insurance were really instrumental in exposing the inefficiency of these traditional approaches in the sorts of markets that we work in. IFPRI researchers over the years have pioneered innovative models while generating critical insights into the persistent problems of low farmer demand, basis risk, one of those jargon terms which we can talk about later, asymmetric information, another jargon, and just not having enough money to be able to buy the insurance right at the beginning of the policy. So some examples of success are that we have a number of innovations where we've really improved product quality, so allowing farmers to have better products that they can buy at more affordable prices. A lot of work on thinking about how to bundle insurance with credit, whether that's through this approach called risk contingent credit or other approaches, as well as bundling inputs such as seeds or fertilizer purchases with insurance to increase demand. And then also having early triggers built into these insurance products so that farmers are receiving payouts early on in the season and able to invest in reducing their exposure to risk so that they're not just using insurance to deal with the problems of a weather shock, but they're able to take actions such as increasing investments in irrigation during the season to reduce the impact of the shock. And an impact study said that a notable feature of IFPRI's insurance work is that it's gone beyond initial experimental research and is involved into sustained programs with implementing partners who have a commercial interest in the insurance product. So this is an area where IFPRI has already been working a lot with the private sector and seeing the private sector really take up and be our pathway to impact. This has happened in Uruguay, Kenya, Ethiopia, India. So what about going forward? Where do we see these directions taking us in the next 5 years? First off, we see increased utilization of AI to mine the vast array of IFPRI data sets, maybe some of the ones that are online that were mentioned earlier, but also a lot that aren't yet online, including our hundreds of thousands of images of farmers' fields and experts' opinion on crop losses that have been generated as we've been doing this insurance work over the last decades. And we see this as a way to really drive continued innovation in product design and increasing the value that farmers get from these products. A key priority for us is making sure that as we design these products, we do what often the private sector won't do, and we think about how do we include those people who will not normally be included, particularly looking at gender-specific needs and constraints, but this can be true for other groups also that are not being included in market-only approaches. We want to continue to understand how insurance can be bundled with other services to increase take-up. This could be with climate information, or it could be with remittance transfers, to really expand and reduce the cost of managing risk. And finally, we want more evidence. We want to be building much more evidence on how can we bring about these effective anticipatory actions. How can these early payouts be used to just reduce the impact of these shocks on households' crop incomes, as well as helping them manage their consumption. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Deanna Olney, and I'll be talking about our thematic area of sustainable healthy diets and nutrition. And I think, as many of you have heard today, IFPRI has been working on issues around malnutrition for decades now. But our work, continues to focus on solving all forms of malnutrition, but our work has continued to evolve over the last several decades. And most recently, we've been shifting towards a focus more on understanding diets and how to address poor quality diets that we know are the primary contributor to all forms of malnutrition and the leading cause of disease worldwide. We have also shifted our focus to thinking more about wasting and how to address the issues that are causing wasting for the 48 million children under 5 years of age that are affected by wasting. We continue to work on addressing micronutrient deficiencies that are affecting about 2 billion people worldwide, and we're starting to work more and more on ways to prevent the increase in overweight and obesity that continues to grow and is affecting more than 2 billion people worldwide. And so to address these issues, as we've done in the past and will continue to do in the future, we work with our partners to provide evidence-based insights to support the development and evolution of context-relevant, cost-effective programs and policies to achieve sustainable healthy diets, prevent malnutrition in all its forms, and to improve health and well-being outcomes that are related to this. So how do we do this? And again, this uses the four approaches that Purnima has presented, but we first need to understand very well what are the diet and nutrition challenges at hand within the specific context and for the populations for which we are working. And to address these issues, we generate robust evidence on diet quality, nutrient intake, and nutrition and health status. Coupled with this, these quantitative assessments, we also conduct extensive literature reviews when we work in a new place to try to understand what's been done before, what does the evidence suggest, are the drivers of these issues, what are the patterns that we're seeing, to help us identify what the major problems are, what the patterns are, and how they might be addressed. That takes us to understanding what's driving the problems and also why are these problems persisting. I think we've seen all the different shocks over the last few decades, or not the last few decades, the last few years, that have actually stagnated some of the progress that was being made in reducing undernutrition, while we are seeing all these, also at the same time, these increase in other nutrition problems, which is just increasing the complexity of the issues that we need to solve. So we really need to understand what's driving these issues, what's changeable, what's modifiable, and what can't be changed. So here we look at issues around consumer behavior, food environments, access to health and nutrition services, poverty, and gender dynamics to help us understand how we can design programs and policies to address these issues. And then, as James highlighted, we also think about the future and what can the future look like. And IFPRI uses our scenario modeling and foresight tools to think about how factors like climate change, demographic shifts, and other changes will impact diets and nutrition in the future. At the core of what we do to try to address these issues is working on the co-design and evaluation of different solutions. We work very closely with communities, governments, and an array of partners to co-design and test solutions that respond to the local diet and nutrition challenges and their drivers. And we make sure that these are aligned with local priorities. We work across several platforms, of course, the primary one being food systems, where we work together again with our partners to iteratively test different solutions to drive evidence-based programming and policies. Within food systems, I think as Lawrence really highlighted, we are really working on demand side issues, really trying to understand what's driving consumer demand, how can we influence it in a positive way, how can we shift unhealthy food environments to make them healthier, supporting sustainable healthy diets. We're innovating with end-to-end approaches for perishable nutrient-rich foods, trying to bring together several types of interventions to address the multiple food systems barriers to drive sustainable healthy diets. We also continue to work within health systems on maternal and adolescent nutrition, wasting, continuum of care, as well as different micronutrient programs. And we also work on social protection, and I think I'll let Dan speak more about that. But in our area, we really think about how can we use these types of programs to drive diet and nutrition change in addition to their primary poverty goals. And then we also work within the education sector on school-based programming around school meals, school food environments, and nutrition education. And to support all of this evidence generation, we also want all that evidence generation to go into programs and policies. So we work also closely with our government partners and others on capacity sharing and policy support, where we inform policy and financing solutions and support governance structures that are needed to successfully implement and sustain and scale nutrition solutions. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I've learned that as we work on presenting the new IFPRI strategy that I will forever be following Deanna, which I'm pleased to do because the work of their unit and that work is really phenomenal. So I want to talk to you about economic and social inclusion. So it's clear that reducing poverty and promoting economic and social inclusion is fundamental to the development challenges that IFPRI seeks to address and to reducing hunger and malnutrition. This area of work is really keeps people at the focus and in the center of IFPRI's work on research overall on food systems transformation. Earlier today, Yo and others talked quite a bit about broad success over the last 3 decades in reducing extreme poverty, but also that success has really plateaued. And at the same time, we've seen actually an increase in rates of acute food insecurity. Now with 300 million people suffering food insecurity, and that's a number that's been going up every year for the last 5 years. What hasn't been discussed is that we've made some progress in terms of gender equity and empowerment, but the rate of progress there is so slow that it would take us 123 years to close the global gender gap. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Finally, an unmistakable trend that is really driving our work is that nearly 2/3 of the world's extreme poor by 2030 will be living in fragile and conflict-affected settings. So this is really fundamental to sort of what we need to do to address change. So with that, I want to talk about the work that we're doing in this space. So IFPRI's work on social protection programs includes evaluations of cash transfers, food transfers, school meals, public works. So the cornerstone of this work is impact evaluations that IFPRI has done for years of large-scale national and state-level programs rigorous evaluations, working closely with government to test their programs and test modalities of delivery to see what works. These programs have reached tens of millions of households, and IFPRI is really a leader in doing these very large-scale evaluations. We've actually seen that the demand for this work continues, which we're pleased to see, but at the same time, we're challenged in this environment to find new strategies for making data collection cheaper, to find ways to be more responsive to our government and other partners, and helping them learn about what the most cost-effective strategies are for their programming. IFPRI is perhaps best known in this space for our work on testing nutrition-sensitive and gender-sensitive policies and programs. So we're using evidence from recently completed evaluations, for example, of impact of maternal cash grants plus nutrition information on improving both women's empowerment and improving child nutrition from work that was done in Bangladesh and Ethiopia and Malawi to inform those programs and inform how they can be improved, while at the same time working with stakeholders to continue to make those investments. On livelihood interventions. So a growing area of work over the last several years has been around livelihood interventions for economic inclusion programs. These are sometimes called graduation programs. They have the potential to have longer, more sustained effects. They meet households a bit closer to where they are in terms of investments in their own livestock and in businesses. And so look like a promising model, and IFPRI has really been at the forefront of the literature in this area, trying to show how we can make those programs more effective. A big part of our work there has been to expand the focus to get us into under-prioritized and understudied outcomes, such as gender-based violence and also mental health, where we've tested group therapy models alongside these programs. On gender equity empowerment, this is where our work is really world-leading. And built up over the last couple of decades, it's become a really core component of work across IFPRI. We're testing innovative strategies such as women's self-help groups in Bangladesh and India, and edutainment program delivered through film clubs in Senegal. We have continued leadership here clearly on metrics. It's been mentioned, metrics for measuring women's empowerment. The Women's Empowerment and Agriculture Index has been mentioned many times today. Our latest effort there is to expand that into national statistical offices globally, with really rapid take-up now that they're building this into a lot of their national living standards surveys. On governance and voice, so IFPRI is going to continue to expand its work on governance and inclusion of the voices of women and marginalized groups in local institutions and civil society, where our work shows how this improves accountability and effectiveness of service delivery and strengthens local food systems. So now I'm just going to take a minute to pivot. Thank you. To pivot to our work on fragility and fragile and conflict-affected settings, which is where all of this work comes together. This is an area where we're really pivoting now to try to both expand the evidence and work much more closely with our partners. So in this context, we've had an expansion of work into really fragile places, including recently Mali, Myanmar, Sudan, Somalia, and Yemen. We've had to learn to adapt our data collection strategies in these settings and to use enhanced security protocols, working with our teams to flexibly work in the field and the way that we work with them to collect data. We have to use that data a bit differently. We can't always complete RCTs in some cases, and we have to try other strategies to build evidence that's useful to our partners. And then we're just testing different programming approaches like anticipatory action, graduation models, and displaced settings, as we've done in Nigeria and Somalia, and we'll continue that work. Overall, our work here really brings us closer to sort of the ideal that we want, to work very closely with our partners to address their needs and questions that they have in a rigorous way so that they can use evidence to really improve outcomes. Thank you.
Excellent. So now we're going to pivot to discussing our regional priorities for Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And let's start with Stephen Wede-Omamo, our director, both for development strategies and governance and for Africa. The floor is yours.
Thanks, David. And hello, everybody. Africa has been the center of gravity for IFPRI's work for a long time. And we expect that to continue. This is because this is where so many of the issues that IFPRI works on are concentrated, and where really some of the opportunities to make a real difference also are concentrated. So we're missing a slide here. The slide that I wanted to start out with is the slide that shows that IFPRI's presence in Africa really is the fulcrum, if you like, or the base for what we are going to do in the continent, what we've done over the years, and what is going to continue to be our way of working closely with governments and partnering with them to bridge that evidence to policy gap. This is a dense slide, but it has a very simple message that each of IFPRI's themes speaks very powerfully to the issues facing Africa. And IFPRI's toolbox brings amazing capabilities to address those problems. So if we go starting there with the first theme, inclusive growth and transformation, the issues there have to do with uneven transformation, a lot of policy ambition, but also challenges in meeting that ambition in terms of weak delivery systems and fiscal stress. And you've already heard about the tools that are available there, having to do with foresight, public investment, and also, of course, strengthening delivery systems. In terms of resilient and sustainable production, again, the issues have to do with climate, water, low productivity, degraded soils, as Claudia mentioned. Again, the tools are available, already in place, already making a difference, and we intend to proceed in this way. Fair and efficient markets and trade. Again, the issues have to do with fragmented markets. We've heard about high costs. And also the integration of the African continental free trade area at country level, but also the conversation, if you like, between that transformation framework and the CAADP transformation framework. And the tools are there, as I mentioned, as you can see there. We already heard about some of them. On sustainable healthy diets and nutrition, again, we've heard about the high cost of diets and this persistent malnutrition. There has been improvement, but it remains very difficult. And we have tools that are available in terms of tracking, nutrition-sensitive policy design, and monitoring. And in the last theme on economic and social inclusion, we've heard already about these persistent barriers affecting women, youth, SMEs and markets, and we have the tools already available for that. So IFPRI's themes speak very, very strongly to all of these issues. We intend to, oops. Oh dear, there's another slide missing. I don't know what happened. I don't know, is there something about Africa that is, no, honestly, the next slide, it looks a lot like this one, which has also just disappeared. Okay, here it is. Thank you for finding it. So this slide also has another very simple message, that the CAADP, well, IFPRI is going to committed to continuing its very, very strong contribution to CAADP in terms of design and in terms of implementation. You already heard today from John. He is on the ground working with partners on the design of this, designing of the results framework. Now, if you look at these CAADP strategic objectives, given that they were developed with a similar framework to IFPRI's, they actually open up scope for IFPRI's own food system-driven framework to speak very strongly to it. Okay. And in a similar way, given that the frameworks are very, very similar, the toolbox that IFPRI brings to the table also speaks very strongly to this. I'm not going to go through them all, but that's really the message there, that each strategic objective has a very clear space for IFPRI contribution, and those tools that are central to IFPRI's framework speak directly to the CAADP agenda. So we're going to continue to invest in CAADP, and this will be a really important contribution that IFPRI will be making on the continent in the years to come. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Oh my God, we are very quiet here. I'm not feeling very comfortable. Anyway, good afternoon. So we are actually a third pillar of this strategy, as Purnima pointed out, is the regional and country engagements. IPPRI did not have a regional office until 2004. It began with the decentralization effort. And Peter Hazel was one of the architects. And he's the one who had sent me to Africa, said, well, go there, you're working on price policies, that'll be important for the region, go try to make some difference there. So somehow he convinced, I went there and never looked back. So I'll try to, in three slides, I'll try to answer three questions. Question number one is, what are the roles of a regional office in advancing IPPRI's strategic agenda? Second question is, are the focuses of this strategy aligned with the regional priorities? I think that's going to be the most important one. And the third one is, how can the ongoing regional activities can contribute to the execution of this new strategy? So three questions. Here we go. So IPPRI was, as I said, we did not have regional office until 2004. Objective at that point, outlined by the committee headed by Hazel Committee, Peter Hazel, I call it Peter Hazel Committee, is to serve as the face of IPPRI in the region, foster partnership with the regional and national institutions, governments and other stakeholders, enhance coordination across research themes to deliver evidence that supports regional bodies and countries in the South Asia region. That's what South Asia is specific. Now, all morning we have been talking about impact. Our board chair said, impact, 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 decentralization, decentralization. So all of them are there. We talked about impact, and every single time we had to look at a country-specific engagements. So that is there. And it came through decentralization. Even when in the early days, IPPRI focused on a handful of countries, that was the line of engagement. Early days always had a champion to work on in one of those countries. In Bangladesh, Nurul Islam was there. Maximo was mentioning that. So that championed the change for policies. I think that was very important. That was important for Egypt. That was important for Pakistan. That was important for Vietnam. So now question is this strategy aligned with that? I would say yes. On the second question, does the focus of the new strategy align with the, yes, on the second question, there's no doubt about it. I'm not going to read about it, but think about the priorities of the Asia region. Just in this year, half of the year, you had a flood in Pakistan, 100 people died, 250 of them children, billions of dollars of war damage. Sri Lanka, 300 people died. Indonesia, it was flooded. Vietnam, it was flooded. And heat spell in India, northern India, is about 4 to 6 times per year. And these are devastating challenges for those countries. The heartland of Green Revolution, Punjab and Haryana, they're facing severe challenges. But the policymakers who adopted Green Revolution policies, they did not have to worry about them. Their worry is to feed millions of hungry mouths. That was their objective. So new set of challenges have come up for us. And how do we engage to deliver impact through decentralization? That will be the objective. Now, another example let me give you. We talked about employment generation. But we know India is an example of growth, jobless growth. So if that happens, growth alone is not going to deliver. If it is a jobless growth, we need to think about how to create jobs within the food system so that that growth can be inclusive, equitable. And we're talking about empowerment of women and the marginalized group. That will continue to be important as a social responsibility. And these are more important in South Asia than any other region in the world. So it is true that South Asia region, perhaps the single largest beneficiary of the Green Revolution. But at the same time, CGIAR has also benefited selling that as success. In the future, these new set of challenges that are emerging, we have to be part of that to make a difference. My third question is the third slide. Can ongoing activities help this thematic research unit to contribute to the development agenda? I would say yes. My predecessors, Dr. Ashok Gulati, P.K. Joshi, have done a lot of work, and we have done quite a bit of work. We have partnership with 3 largest regional associations now: ASEAN, Association for Southeast Asian Nations, BIMSTEC, Bay of Bengal Initiative, and SAARC. You know, SAARC is a problematic one because of geopolitical reasons. But we have BIMSTEC, we have ASEAN. These are fantastic partnerships. We are part of a think tank network. We have partnership at each country at various levels. And in India, we have developed a new strategy. I wish Professor Chand was here. We have partnership with the national think tank like Niti Aayog, but we have also partnership at the state level. Work that we are doing in Orissa or Bihar, in the future UP, we can bring all this thematic unit together to work together. So the vertical will be working. At the same time, we'll be working at the horizontal level to drive changes and have impact. With that, thank you so much.
Sorry, I was at the very end of the room, but I'm sure everybody will be happy to see me because I'm the last one to present. So there you go. So I'm Valeria Piñeiro. I'm the regional representative for Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is going to be a little bit different because the region is a little bit different in the way also we approach the region. So here we go. Latin America and the Caribbean has key assets, which are very important in terms of not only global food security and environmental sustainability, as everybody has been saying for the last years, but it also has very important human capital and partnerships in there. So we have a lot of policy innovation in the past. So as it was mentioned also by David earlier today and many others today, there's not a lack of policy. We do have a lot of policies, and some of them have been very key in also leading the work towards, for example, social protection, as Dan mentioned earlier before, labeling for nutrition in the front package of the labeling, in terms of climate smart agriculture, and just to name some of them. But we also have very key challenges as well. The region also faces big inequality, as it was also mentioned as one of the key topics today, but also climate exposure and also problems with nutrition. It has, the region has one of the highest in terms of obesity and so forth, that it was already mentioned, so I'm not going to go back into that. But as IFPRI, we want to really not only be able to produce this evidence that it was mentioned also earlier, but also how we can communicate. And that communication with the region is where we've been spending a lot of time here. So just to show you some of things here, we are convinced that we need to work at the global, but also at the regional and the local level. So we work on the 3 pieces, and we don't see them as separate. They are totally interconnected. So we always think about it in terms of the bottom-up approach, but also top-down. And everything that we think about it, we try to put it into this framework. And we always connect the 3 pieces in a way. So for example, at the global level, Latin America, it's always impacted by, I don't know, the geopolitical changes that we observe now, or any climate event. Those things impact the region, and not only the region, but also going deeper into the national level. So we have to be able to track that to make sure that we have a solution by that. But also Latin America is very important, again, not only in terms of this global food security and so forth, but also we're very good in organizational practices, for example, and technologies that we can also export to the world, and how we can connect that with other regions. So at the global level, we work with the G20, with the WTO, so forth. At the regional level, we also try to connect people in the region, and we always work with regional institutions like it is IICA, but as well as the IDB and CAF. For example, we have we work with their last flagship the IDB in terms of productivity, IFPRI was part of that. And then at the local level, we have big history in terms of working with Guatemala and Honduras. We're working also now with Argentina, helping them with looking at the tax regimes that they have. So everything that we do, we really try to co-design the research with our partners, co-brand, again, through flagships and so far, and we make sure that we communicate that evidence for action and impact, and that is key for us. So just to highlight two initiatives that I think that at least I really like a lot. One is Avanzar 2030. IFPRI leads this work, but it is done also with the ICA, Juno Evidence, FAO is part of that, the IDB, as well as 30 other institutions. Again, at the global, at the regional, and also local. We work with universities and also some of the INEAs. What is Avanzar 2030? Is do evidence synthesis to capture what are the most efficient interventions to obtain the system transformation, the agri-food system transformation for the region. What's the idea of this is to really come up with a set not only of papers, which we can all love to do, but also with the data in creating a dashboard with what are the best interventions and what's going to be the impact. And what's going to be the impact in terms of sustainability, so looking at environmental, social, and economic indicators. What's the purpose of this? Is to really work with the region in creating the evidence, but also the network of researchers. We're more than 60 researchers now that we will be working together for the last 2 years, and we have a plan to continue till 2030. So we have new things coming up every year. And then the second one is the Mercosur Outlook. This is a foresight, and also we created that network of researchers between Embrapa and the Argentine government, also including Paraguay and Uruguay, and they are going to be able to continue that work as well. And so just to finish, this is how we engage with LAC. We also had the celebration of IFPRI in Latin America. IICA hosted us in Costa Rica. And we came up looking at the past, but more than anything, what's the future, where we want to be there, and to talk about what are the right interventions and the right path to get us to that place that we want us to be. And we focus in 4 blocks that also connect with the 5 thematic areas that it was discussed today. One was governance and policy alignment. The other one is the delivery and implementation. Again, that is one of the things that are needed. The innovation and the foresight, what are the tools, what are the innovations that we need to get in order to get to that future, and then the addressing the inequalities that are in the region. So we have this discussion. It was a panel in which we include people from the World Bank, the IDB, local institutions, and so forth, to really create and collect all that information that will help us also do the program strategy for the next 2 years. Thank you.
Excellent. So I think we've given you a pretty detailed overview of the new IFPRI strategy. This has been, as Purnima said, more than a year and a half of work in the midst of all of the changes that have happened globally. Now for a few remarks, a little bit of reflection on our work, or maybe the bigger picture. I invite to the podium Chris Barrett. He's the Stephen B. and Janice G. Ashley Professor of Applied Economics and Management at Cornell University. He's also co-editor-in-chief of Food Policy, one of our favorite journals, and holds many other appointments and roles in the food policy space and food systems transformation. Welcome.
So thank you very much for inviting my participation, IFPRI colleagues. I much appreciate it. Especially appreciate your thoughtfulness in importing upstate New York December weather for us, just so I could feel at home, and this invitation to give a 90-minute lecture. Somewhat more seriously, only somewhat, thank you, Dan, for the IFPRI swag that I get to take home with me. Now, much more seriously, I really want to commend and thank the IFPRI team, and I do mean team, because I know the senior leadership has been heavily involved in this, but I know this has stretched well throughout the entire research team here and in all of your locations around the world. I want to thank you for the hard and thoughtful and self-reflective work that's gone into this strategic plan. as chair of SPC, but I think more importantly, as part of the global community of people who think about and care a lot about food policy, we need IFPRI to continue to punch way above its weight. And I say that because it's important to keep in mind how small IFPRI is in the grander scheme of things. It's very natural to think an organization whose budget roughly $100 million or so, that's hopefully, as of this year, I mean, that sounds really big compared to your or my bank account, but that is a trivial amount of money in the global scheme of things. And yet the impact of what IFPRI works on is huge. So punching above its weight has been IFPRI's history for 50 years, and it is critically important that it continues to do this. I say that as an outsider. I'm not an alumnus. I have never had an affiliation with IFPRI. I'm just a longtime admirer and sometimes collaborator of IFPRI's. And I want to emphasize in particular that the team has been really thoughtful in exploring IFPRI's comparative advantage. Sometimes begrudgingly so, sometimes not liking the inconvenient questions I and others would ask. You know, if you're offered $10 million to work on a project, what would the content be that gets you to say no? Because the opportunity cost of your skill set and your reputation is too great to compromise to take on this work. Those sorts of questions are inconvenient for all of us who need dollars to do our research, but they're really important in figuring out who you are as an organization and what you are uniquely positioned to do. And I'm going to use my words, not theirs, but I think it really boiled down to four things. The first has been emphasized multiple times is research quality. You know, IFPRI has for a long time led the world in a variety of impact metrics in the field of agricultural economics, but it's also a preeminent place on the political economy of food and agriculture, on nutrition, on a range of agricultural science-related things. So agricultural economics may be the single biggest component in disciplinary terms, but it's by no means the only one. Research quality is crucial. 20 years ago, I chaired a CGIAR Stripe review, as they called it, which just meant looking across all of the centers at the time. This was on all of the social sciences. And the four of us who comprised the panel, I think, were somewhat alarmed, actually, at the deterioration at the margin in research quality in the social sciences in the CGIAR writ large. It was very clear that the funding model of the CGIAR, the switch to much more restricted funding, much more short-term funding, was driving an expansion in work that was really a fairly marginal quality. IFPRI was the exception to that rule. IFPRI still had a core of absolutely first-rate research. And maintaining fidelity to these standards is really important because policymakers don't have the time to go figure out if you've got it right or wrong. Subjecting yourself to rigorous peer review constantly, being prepared to have people tell you what you've done wrong and going back to get it right before you go to policymakers and before you go to the media is crucially important, not just to make sure that you don't commit malpractice, that you're putting out good information, you're providing sound evidence, but also to build your credibility so that after a while you have to sell yourself less and have people approach you more because they know you are going to be a trusted independent source of sound advice, sound evidence. So research quality is really, I think, the first bedrock of comparative advantage for IFPRI relative to other providers of information. You know, Cornell is purportedly a very good institution in this space too, but we don't have the critical mass. You know, we like to think we can keep up with you in research quality, but you can cover a broader frontage than we can. Second part of comparative advantage is communications. There's been a lot said about this. The big deficiency most of us in research universities have is we are so obsessed with research for publication, and then with teaching, the thing that gets our bills paid, that we forget that our research doesn't translate immediately into change in the world without commercialization or without clear communications. I can attest, having worked with Charlotte and her team on the Global Food Policy Report earlier this year, IFPRI's got a really well-oiled machine for communications, does a phenomenal job of distilling the complicated gobbledygook we pointy heads produce into clear messaging, not always completely jargon-free, but jargon-reduced, let's say. It's sort of like reduced fat food. It's not fat-free, but it's at least a little healthier for the policymaker. You have a comparative advantage in communications that most other providers of research in this space lack. Use it. So I say this especially to the younger researchers where you've been trained by all of us at universities to focus on publications and then move along. Try to get that little advisor chatter in your ear out and go listen to Charlotte and her team. Take the extra time to translate this so that it communicates well into the media and to your intended final consumers, governments, NGOs, and private sector users. The third source of comparative advantage, which has really begun to flourish over the last decade or so, is IFPRI's global nature. The decentralization movement meant that, unlike any other organization I can think of that works in this space, IFPRI is still a global organization doing global work, but it now has a really serious local presence in a bunch of different places, and hence this term I use, glocal, that you're at once global and local. And that's crucially important because agri-food systems are not like IT systems, where the production context, the consumption context is pretty uniform worldwide. Agroecological differences matter enormously to what farmers can do and how they can do it in different places within countries, much less across countries, such that technology transfer across borders has only limited effectiveness. There's a lot of loss of performance as you move one technology across boundaries, but also in diets and cultures. So what you can do depends fundamentally on local context. And by investing heavily in relationships and physical presence in key countries, I think of the Ethiopia work, for example. I don't think any other organization could have done the PSNP work that IFPRI led, because there is no organization that has a comparable presence and the research quality and the communications skill. And PSNP has been hugely important, not just for Ethiopia, but for the rest of the world and the things we've learned from PSNP's successes and its shortcomings. So that global characteristic is also kind of the third pillar of comparative advantage here, I think. And fourth is its transdisciplinary nature. We like to think at Cornell that we have relatively low disciplinary boundaries, that people move across fields, and there are several people in the room who I think exemplify that, who did train at Cornell. But we are still organized in 19th century Germanic disciplinary traditions. I mean, that's the history of Western Europe's universities, and all of us are very, very slow to move away from that. IFPRI dispensed with that long, long ago. It's problem-oriented, which gives you the capacity to organize effectively across disciplinary boundaries to do hugely important work. The social protection work can't be done just by economists or sociologists or nutritionists, but your capacity to work in teams to do this isn't unique, but the constellation of those four things, your research quality, your communication skill, the global characteristic of IFPRI staffing and organization, and the transdisciplinary problem-oriented nature gives you a comparative advantage to work on these important problems that I don't think others of us have. And I say this with some admiration, but mainly with appreciation, because the world faces serious challenges. And as much as this process of strategic discernment and making this plan probably was painful at times, I think it's also positioned you incredibly well in a very difficult moment. I've talked to a number of other organizations that work in the research advocacy practitioner space. Many are really fumbling around in the dark right now. What do they do with budgets being cut massively? Because they haven't gone through the discernment process IFPRI has gone through. I think you are actually extraordinarily well positioned, not just to adapt to the moment, but to take advantage of this as a way to open up IFPRI's next round of possibilities for impact, and to help to inform all the rest of us as we fumble around to figure out where we go in a rapidly changing world. So I have found today really exciting to listen to, not at all surprising because I saw some of the inputs along the way, but really pleased to see it all come together so well, and thank you very much for including me.
All right, I believe we have some time. We still have time, right? For a little Q&A? 20 minutes, in fact. Why don't I invite everybody up to the front here to answer some questions. This Q&A is focused both internally. There are lots of staff here who have lots of questions about the new strategy, but also, and importantly, externally, because, you know, we are nothing without our partners, right? So having your input on the strategy, your questions, I think is very, very valuable. So we have online questions. Please ask the questions online. I think, Charlotte, you'll be able to moderate them. And from people in the room, the mics are right here. You know the routine. I encourage you all to ask questions. Peter, you look like you're about to jump out of your seat with a question. No? Then it's all yours. The floor is open.
Okay. About my personality? Well, okay. No, you have a wonderfully articulated strategy of, you've got your mission of this sustainable, equitable, whatever food system, which is great, and you've unpacked that into various research themes and beyond that, and you end up with a column of activities on the right-hand side of your slides. Are you going to take a model country and sort of bring all this together, or are you going? You've got these country strategies. You've got teams in about a dozen countries. Could these become model countries? Or my impression from reading all those evaluation reports is that, different divisions of IFPRI still go out and do different things in different countries. It's never really coordinated in any one place. The country strategy programs really focus on the rural transformation process, development strategy. They don't integrate nutrition and all these things into their work. Can you not make them into model countries where you really show how all these things can come together and fit together into a holistic strategy, and then convince a government to adopt it?
Collect a couple questions and then go to them. We have one in the back here, Olivier, and then.
Yes, thank you very much for presenting this. Thank you very much for presenting this new strategy. I'm really pleased to hear what you have said. And I also very much appreciate Chris Kind's words. So maybe first an observation. It was interesting what was said, but maybe it was also interesting what was not said. So I haven't heard any reference to the CGR. So and that maybe relates me already to my first question. Maybe Dan, you a little bit. What is the organizational implication of this new strategy? That would be my first question. And the second question is, what is actually new? I heard a lot of what we have been doing good and what we would like to continue, but I also would like to learn now what do we do different.
And Rob, if I may invite you.
No, how did? Now it's on, sorry. Well, great day, thank you. It was so nice to be here. So I'm Rob Bertram, now with the Food Security Leadership Council, which is advocating for reinvestment by the United States in global food security. And, but I think most of you know that I used to be with AID, so this may sound a bit like a donor comment, even though I'm not a donor, but I just want to beg forgiveness. But the Food Security Leadership Council has really focused on sustainable productivity growth as our main North Star going forward. And I wanted to just reflect on that a bit. You know, the food systems movement, we're about 10 years in now, it really came with the climate and the negative dietary transition push. It's been a bad 10 years for the extreme poor and undernourished. Somebody referred to the fact that the numbers have been going the wrong way for the last 7 years. And at my agency, people quit talking about productivity at that time. And I think there's connection. I think climate change, Claudia, I think you mentioned that. But so it's this de-emphasis of productivity. And so, for example, when we talk about Beyond the Farm, we did that and it did not work out well. The people who were poor and undernourished in rural areas stayed that way. And we had business deals in capitals and such. Now, I'm not saying that markets are critical. We all know that. But so context matters. That's one message. Then the poverty. Oh, I know, Claudia. I just wanted to talk to you about your 50-year TFP. It's a little misleading because the last number of years have been really bad. It's like alarm bells should be ringing about the fact that we have negative productivity growth in the United States and not so good elsewhere, the outliers being South Asia and Brazil. Latin America, I think largely because of Brazil. So again, this investment in agricultural productivity is really critical. And then the diet affordability issue. In terms of diet quality, we saw during COVID, Marie and Derek both put out data that showed how tightly child undernutrition in Bangladesh was to a spike in food prices. So I feel like we're not capturing the urgency of the fact that a lot of people are being left behind, perhaps. And maybe, again, it depends on where you're focused and so forth. And I'll try to finish now. But then also the opportunity, if you take that productivity thread and run it through, is you can start talking about extensification. You can start talking about land use change, deforestation, biodiversity, water. So there's a lot of space to run there in a climate challenged world, and of course climate change. And then I guess the last thing is, you have an incredible bully pulpit here. People listen to you. As somebody who lived in the Washington world for all these years, you drive thinking and decision making. So getting it right and transformation is a lovely word, but what does it mean? I was so glad, Purnima, when you put up the vision, you did have things like hunger and malnutrition and such in there, because boy, transformation, it's so used. But anyway, sorry for the litany, but it was a great day. But I do really want to challenge you all on the fact that a lot of people are being left behind in the last 10-year paradigm. Thank you.
Pascal.
Yeah, first, congratulations for having succeeded in not talking about CGIAR for the last 7 hours. The first time in my time as chair that I can spend 7 hours at IFPRI without talking about the CGIAR reform, but that's probably going to come for later. Now, my question for you on the strategy, obviously what you've done is needs driven. It's demand driven. Fine. How much of this strategy in what you've changed or what you project, how much reflects the necessity of finding resources? How aligned is it with what your funders have in mind, understanding that global public good is one thing for global public institutions, it may be a bit less for more private or philanthropic driven resources. So that my question is, where are the resources in the factoring in of the strategy?
Excellent. So we'll go to Olivier, and then Charlotte, you've got a couple of online questions. And then Jimmy.
Check, okay. Yeah, I have a very short question. There seems to be a lot of overlaps across the thematic areas that you presented. My question is, was this intentional? And how are we planning to work effectively to ensure there is collaboration, but at the same time also avoid duplication and capture the synergies across the themes?
Jimmy? Sorry, Charlotte?
Yeah, I have a question on the CGIAR, believe it or not. Sorry, Pascal. The question is, how is IFPRI working with our sister centers to streamline efforts on policy cohesion for food systems transformation? Sorry, Rob. At the national and regional level. And then maybe just to add, we've had a lot of questions here, but this is a really good one, I think. How does the strategy strengthen partnerships with local private sector actors, universities, and incubators to scale innovations in food systems? What mechanisms will IFPRI use to translate research into actionable policy and on-the-ground implementation? And then we had another question earlier that was asking about what kind of targets are we setting for each one of these 5 thematic areas? So just a few questions for a large panel. So we probably will take another hour, but no, I'm just kidding.
And then 1 minute each.
Look, it's been a fabulous day. I really enjoyed being here. Thanks for inviting me. Your strategy sounds very exciting. I have great fondness for IFPRI, not only because of your reputation, but because I always enjoyed hosting IFPRI on the campuses where I worked. I want to ask you to think aloud a little bit about how you're going to finance this strategy. We've heard that ODA, which has been one of the main means of funding CGIAR research, is declining, and declining probably for good. I'm on the board of IITA, so I listened to what they had to say. Many are focusing on trying to get country funding. But we've been talking a lot about global public good. Can we fund global public good from national resources or national good targeted funds? How are we going to try to generate this global public good from probably national funding? And although Chris said being located in countries is a good thing, and I agree it is a good thing, extrapolating from the very variable circumstances of country-specific research to global problems is not a trivial matter. So I'd like to hear a little bit, if you may, about your reflections, how you're going to fund this strategy.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to take 2 last questions. Maximo, 3.
Only
and in the back.
One simple question. When I hear your strategy, it seems like you're alone. Why you're assuming you're alone? Because I don't hear nothing on partnerships, how you are going to link. Many of the things that you are doing are being done by others also, but you have some comparative advantage that will make a huge complement and less abstract from the CIR, but even within the CIR, forget about the structure and the reform. But the centers, there are some centers that can provide a lot of things that you can work with to implement. So how are you feeling, how you are going to interact with others so that you can bring your comparative advantage to work with others to achieve what you need? Because that will help you to answer also the financing question. No?
Tsitsi?
Thank you very much, and congratulations to IFPRI on the new strategy. I was really impressed that the mission is about working with partners to, provide policy solutions. So my question just takes a different angle to Maximo. I was wondering, to what extent do the views of your partners are reflected in the new strategy? And perhaps you can elaborate on the process in how you engage partners to develop the strategy. Thank you.
Excellent. And in the back, last one.
My question has practically been asked by the last two speakers, but for me, I think I would like to know which different set of stakeholders have made input into the strategy. So the world changed rather significantly in the past year or so. Did that open up conversations with different partners and stakeholders that influence the wonderful strategy that we just listened to? Thank you.
All right, excellent. We have a long list of questions. I see none of you are writing this down. So you've memorized them, or you've got them on your phone. Good. So you each get 1 minute to answer one favorite question. James, why don't you start?
I have to go to Rob's question. You mentioned transformation too many times. We've also had this conversation so many times, and you convince me every time, and then I disappoint you every time you hear me talk. So I think you're right. I think there are elements. There has been a danger of chasing the shiny new thing, and I think the food system has been a bit of an amorphous thing, and we have chased it. And it is at a risk of losing the fundamentals of agricultural growth. I think two things. I think one is, you're right, we need to continue to acknowledge when the evidence tells us that agricultural productivity is still the fundamental driver of broad-based growth. We need to tell that story and not just chase where the funding leads us around the new things. The second is that I think we do have to build bridges with other partners outside of the Ministry of Agriculture, outside of the NARS. And to do that, we need to recognize that we all have contributions to make towards, say, reducing poverty and malnutrition and so on. And so I think we also at the same time need to acknowledge that when the evidence tells us that it's not just raising agricultural productivity, that it is broader food system transformation, we need to tell that story too. And so I think it is a matter of that nuance. And so, yeah, I appreciate your thoughts again, and we will continue, I promise again, to be honest about what the evidence is showing us. Thanks.
Diana.
Thanks. So maybe I'll address the question on partners, not so much on how they've informed the strategy. I'll let Purnima address that, but just on how we work with partners. I think in the area of nutrition, it's impossible for us not to be working with partners, and we've always done so. And I think the partners that we're working with is evolving. We're working with the UN agencies, as we always have, but we're also working more with other centers, including centers like the World Vegetable Center, World Fish, and those that work on, perishable, nutrient-rich foods, and trying to figure out how to solve multiple barriers within the food system to achieving sustainable, healthy diets. And so I think those types of partnerships will continue to expand. And I think also on the financing side, we're being asked more and more to kind of work more closely on the policy and programming advising kind of services with multilateral banks, with governments and others. And so I think that's an area of growth for us in the nutrition space and likely in other spaces as well. Thanks.
Let me take on a couple of important questions. So firstly on the CGIAR. The CGIAR research programs, we have done actually a very careful mapping of that 5x4. I have many matrix versions of it that put into it the CGIAR research programs, where they land in every cell, if you will, of our strategy. So they are, very much, we're very strongly connected. We have the ability to contribute, but also our engagement with the CGIAR contributes to the achievement of our strategy. We are in an integrated partnership
with the CG. And we lean, into it. We work with them to shape what's happening there and with our other partner centers. So, to me, there's no disconnect, if you will, over there. The second question, Olivia, very good question about what's new. And truly, in the 6 minutes to present everything, there's no chance to say that. But if you look in the short version of the strategy document, there is a series of boxes that says meeting the challenge. Those challenges come from our foresight book and from what we've been seeing and hearing about the challenges that the world is going to face looking forward. So that's where you find the, what are the new things, what are the new directions where we want to meet the challenge. The last question that perhaps I'll take on is, how do we see this all landing, in one geographic space potentially? And I'm sure Shahid and Weri will also speak to that. This is why we have the 3 pillars, if you will. We think about this as 3 pillars, the topics, the approaches, and the geographic landing, if you will, all of which is underpinned by communications and partnerships. Many people have contributed to the inputs to the strategy. I think it's too much to name, but suffice it to say that partnerships are in the mission statement and really at the beginning of the mission statement. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. I will also pick the partnerships in a way, and more answering to, for example, Maximo's question. We do work with partners in working and answering the questions. So through Avanzar 2030, in which FAO and many other partners are part of that, working with global, regional, and local researchers, we answer one question, and we are in the round now of working with questions individual by country. So for example, we just work on school feeding programs linked with local procurement for Honduras. So we look at global literature and then put it into context on what it is the best evidence that will highlight some improvements from the programs that Honduras does. So that is one thing. We work with all of them. Again, we have more than 60, thinking that then we will get the common narrative and everybody will own also those results. So it will get farther away as well with that. That is one of the things that we do, and that we will work more on that. But then the other one is, for thinking about the strategy just for the Latin America program and the Caribbean program moving forward for the next 2 years, we work and have that Q&A with other partners in the region to discuss what are the important things and what should we all thinking. Again, thinking that it's not going to be the strategy that IFPRI will follow, but also to bring them in to work with us to achieve that. Thank you.
1 minute.
1 minute, okay. Yeah, also first, obviously, quickly to Rob, I don't think the term food systems led to a decline in funding for food security. There's many other reasons that led to the decline. I don't have to repeat all of them because I think in the room we all know them. I also agree that food systems is a term that is still somewhat divisive, so there is really not everyone likes the term. Food system transformation is even, I agree, more challenging because it doesn't really bring the urgency and the deprivation and the inequalities. It doesn't come out. I also agree that we should and can do much better in communicating the negative implications of underinvestment in agricultural research and development. I think we have started to do a little bit in terms of CGR's contribution to also the development of high-income countries, because those were our traditional donors. But I agree we have to do much better, also really showing the contribution of our research to middle-income countries and also, I guess, to some extent to low-income countries. So communication, again, on the terminology, I think would be very useful, especially in a world where there is more miscommunication than real and fact-based communication. So again, in fact, that suggests we have to change a little bit our own structure in terms of how we fund research and how we fund communication, and also capacity sharing, which is another area where I think that unfortunately gets lost when funding becomes short. Yeah, so just wanted to mention that, but we strongly believe in the importance of productivity growth, even more so with climate change, obviously, because we're worsening climate change by continuing to underinvest in agricultural productivity growth. And so basically we're killing ourselves slowly but surely, the way we're working to, the way we're operating. When will this change? So when will there be when will this understanding change and there will be, again, more investment in agricultural research and also in development? So there's a question, right? So we all say it's going to be worse and worse and the trends will continue to be negative. But I do believe there will be a change at some point in time because we are going to hit some very traumatic tipping points that I think will lead to a reinvestment in agricultural research. How do we fund our strategy? I will let the moderator. Okay, very good. I don't have to answer that. I'll pass it on.
Okay, so I'll try and answer that one. No, I think it's a great question, and it felt very challenging to say, in a research institute which has very little core funding, what is the role of a strategy? And I think that's been a good question for us to grapple with this year, in a year which has, seismic shifts in how we finance ourselves. It has been, there's definitely pieces of as we've written the strategy, we can see pieces where that is a strong pipeline of funding. And we also see pieces where if we want to keep this piece, which we say we know conceptually is very important, we're going to have to really work extra hard to make sure we're getting financing for that. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Peter's question about bringing it together at country level. I think we do have to adhere to the discipline of responding to demand. So if there is demand of that sort, I think we would pull that together. That said, in almost every country now, we have that integration, that coming together already, right? We have quite a few country program leads here, and part of their job actually is to do what you're describing already with the themes that we have. So to respond to particular demand for research, which invariably cuts across thematic areas, and they pull together the teams. So we expect this to continue with the new themes that we have, but I do expect that the demands will come unlikely for full food system type of research, but rather responding to a particular set of questions that then demand that we pull together teams or the disciplines across the organization as required. But just to confirm that is already happening, and we expect it to intensify and continue. Thanks.
Right. So let me try to respond to Jimmy's question about using national resources to generate global public goods. There's also, and then Pascal's question about financing. So let me take the example of India. Indian Ag Research Council, ICAR, has a budget of over $1 billion, $1.1 billion. So that is more than entire CGIAR combined. And for last 5 to 6 years that I've been there, ED gets over $3.5 million a year from the government of India. So does CIP recently, ICARDA, CIMMYT, and other centers. We just signed the agreement that will give us about $1.5 million over a period of 5 years. So that money is there. Do they mind using the national resources to generate global public good? Actually, they love it. They want a partnership for South-South cooperation. And we will be signing an agreement with them to do that. That's why we have a partnership agreement with the Research and Information Services. That is the wing of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. They basically engage with think tanks around the world, basically, but main focus is in the Pacific region. So given we have a partnership with ASEAN, if we work together, there is a likelihood that we can tap into some of those resources. Second, private sector, we have been talking about it. I know it's very risky going to private sector, but if you go through association, so if I go through Chamber of Commerce and Industries, then I'm not working with a particular private sector. I'm working with multiple of those. So then that creates an opportunity to engage with them. That funding will come. But the bottom line is, I think we have to rediscover ourselves. In the last, from 2004 through 2025, I think we spread a bit too thin in some cases. So we have to organize ourselves so that we go back to the core of it, which is doing good research. Without that, nothing happens. So that is what we have to work on, so that we are scaled down, we are efficient, and well-oiled machine to produce global public good for the good of the society.
Dan, you have the last word.
I'll take advantage of going last and try to hide my non-answer as an answer to the question about partnerships and kind of Maximo's point that through partnerships, we will also get the relationships that create the financing. What I really want to do is pick up on Chris's very positive point for us. The strength of the Institute is in this room and the people that are listening and sort of the comparative advantage that we have that he articulated so well. And so very difficult year, the worst in IFPRI's history financially. And yet I think that our ability to kind of not just reinvent, but essentially rework how we work, to work with our partners. We've done a lot of work in the last year, talking to partners maybe more than usual, certainly in my unit that's been the case. And we've learned an awful lot through that. And so I think that's where the kind of our future success lies, is to be more demand driven, to partner better, to partner more deeply, and to be nimble, to be smart. And we can do that. Thanks.
Excellent. And on that note, I'm not going to sum up. I think we can call it a panel. Thank you all for your insights, and thank you for the questions. I think they're very probing, and that's exactly what we want to take this strategy forward into implementation. Thank you all. You guys can go. Hazel Malapit, unfortunately, had to depart early, so she's no longer the MC. It looks like I'm the MC. And I have only one job now, and that's to invite our DG, Jo Swinen, to take the stage for the closing session. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everybody. Chris stole my joke. I was going to say I now have a 30-minute or an hour presentation, but he already said that. So I am not going to try to summarize much. I mean, it's been an amazing day, I think, in terms of the presentation, the discussions. I really enjoyed the alumni panel as well, the stories that came up, the institutional spillovers of impact, which are so hard to catch in analysis, but the stories are important. And that also links up, I think, the point which in the discussion on AI was said. I mean, you have to be dogmatic about the objective, but not about the way of achieving it, okay? And I thought just bringing these different impact analyses together, that's what we've done this year also. You see in the slide I showed at the very beginning that we have these very different ways of trying to have very rigorous types of impact evaluation, also a series of narratives and stories today. And we know that particularly social science research is very hard to measure the impact from. I mean, I think my own experience is some of the most impactful things that you can do. I work for the European Commission, for the World Bank and other organizations, is to prevent bad ideas to become policy, okay? But that's very hard to measure, okay? But it's maybe the biggest impact. Same thing also I remember from a session we had from people here at IFPRI, country leaders who were, or in senior research who were involved in conflict areas. They said the last thing you want to have is that you get recognition for advising the government, because that may undermine the whole purpose of the policy design and implementation itself. I learned a couple of new concepts today. One was that you can be a bloomer and a gloomer of AI at the same time. I thought it was a nice thing. Lawrence, about the nutrition as a marker and a maker of development. And I also learned that the head of the Ethiopian Commodity Exchange hired the chief economist of FAO earlier in his career, so that's good to know. So let me just thank everyone for joining us today, you in particular. So there's lots of people still online. I thought it was been a very, as I said, thought-provoking, forward-looking discussion, but also looking backwards. And I think a lot of the questions which were raised here are the ones We have been struggling with ourselves, and particularly this year was very special in that way. That's, I'm sure that you may not be fully satisfied with the answer. That's also a bit of the format. We don't want to go for another 2 hours on this thing, but that's also why we're going to invite you for some informal discussions in a second. I should definitely also thank the Gates Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation. They have not only helped to sponsor this event today, but actually throughout the year in various places in the world where we have had events leading up to both discussing our global food policy report, but also leading up stakeholder involvement input on the strategy as it was presented today. Thanks very much to all the IFPRI staff, and especially to our fantastic team from CPA and DGO, who have helped to make this happen today, and all the facilities that were here, the setup, all the IT work, which was great. It's taken a lot of time of planning. Also, a big thanks to everybody who contributed to both the Global Food Policy reports and to the strategy. I should give a big thank to Chris Barrett. I mean, Chris has been heavily involved in both of them. He gave a fantastic speech, I thought, as he so often gives. And I think one of my biggest achievements here is actually to convince him to take on the position of SPC chair for IFPRI. So thanks, Chris. Thanks so much. You have finally, I think they got a point of comparative advantage. Got through. It took some time, but good. I also want to thank particularly our Board of Trustees, Pascal Lamy, who's been sitting here all day with us, but several of the other board members. I see Suzanne sitting there, Jill over there, who've been with us all day, and I'm sure there's been jet lag moments that some of you wanted to either doze off or step out. A big thanks particularly also to Purnima, who has been instrumental in all this throughout a year and a half now of basically getting the strategy to the end. As you said, Channing Arndt has really played a very important role earlier. Several other people like Shivan, Adam Kennedy, Pascal Sabach played an important role, and of course all the senior staff. And Charlotte Heber, Charlotte, a big thanks for you for so many ways you've been helping and being involved. When I was just looking here with our team sitting here, our senior management team, I just want to say a personal, very big thank you to all of them. You should appreciate that, and this extends actually to the HR and the finance team and the communications team, that with one or two exceptions, all of them have only been in their position for 2 to 4 years, okay, which is very recent for a director's position. So this has been very much a new team that brought in enthusiasm, motivation, commitment, I think, to quality, to vision, to values, as I explained it earlier. And for me, it's been a huge privilege to be able to have worked with them, to have gotten them involved in this thing, and to continue to work with them. So in conclusion, I think many people have emphasized that we're in a very different world, okay, with much of uncertainty. I think that is, as I said in the beginning, it increases the need for the types of things that we do, the demand there. At the same time, it basically complicates it, for example, in terms of how we're going to fund the strategy and the engagements that we want to take. I think our strategy is not a static thing, it's a dynamic thing, and so basically, therefore, we hope to continue to get feedback from you in terms of how we can do better, how we can be more innovative, apply it better, more impactful, and for that, the best way at this point, I think, is have an informal discussion over drinks, and those of you who are unhappy with the answer, you can corner somebody over there and answer them further. So we can have a toast at IFPRI at 50 and at CCAP at 30 as well at the same time. Okay, thank you so much.